notice my screen goes in and out because I'm doing this digitally. So I'd like to call the Governance and Priorities Committee meeting to order. Good afternoon and welcome to the January 10th Governance and Priorities Committee meeting. I'd like to first recognize that this meeting is being hosted on the traditional territory of the Neighbourhood First Nation. And our clerk today is Ms. Sheila Gurry. Today's Governance and Priorities Committee meeting will be held in accordance with the Community Charter and Council Procedure Bylaw 2018 number 7272. As the province is now in phase 3 of the reopening plan, question period has been reinstated for those in attendance in the boardroom for agenda items only. The question period sign-up sheet is in the boardroom services and resource center, which is not here. If during the meeting any member of the gallery has a question regarding an agenda item, please write it down in your name and agenda item on the sheet. And at the start of question period, the corporate officer will call those who have signed up to address the council in the event that we were having this in the boardroom. And the first item on the agenda is the introduction of late items, and I believe we have 2.
Yes, thank you, Chair. So with electronic meetings, we do need to have a place for the public to attend. So that is the boardroom. So should any members of the public be in attendance in the boardroom, I will notify you of any questions that they may have, should they have any. So for late items, we have the addition of Reimagine Nanaimo staff PowerPoint presentation titled Emerging Directions Review. And that is agenda item 5A now, and we are reordering the remaining agenda items. And we've also scheduled a recess between 3 and 3:15, which will be helpful for the recording secretary who is in the boardroom, maybe by herself, to have a little break should she need to. And that's it, Chair, for late items.
Thank you. Is there any other items anybody wishes to add? Seeing none, I would like a motion for the adoption of the agenda as amended. A motion by Councillor Martman, seconded by His Worship Mayor Krog. All in favor, raise your hand or say aye. Any opposed? Seeing none, that's carried. And then we're looking for a motion for the adoption of the minutes as circulated. Motion by Mayor Krog, seconded by Councillor Thorpe. Any changes to the minutes? Seeing none, I'll call for the motion. All those in favor, raise your hand, say aye. Any opposed? Seeing none, we're going to move right along into item number 5, which is Reimagine Nanaimo, one of our late items, and is to be introduced by Dale Lindsay, the Deputy Chief Administrative Officer and General Manager of Development Services. Go ahead, Mr. Lindsay.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It's a mouthful.
Yes, it is.
Yeah, Happy New Year to those council members who I haven't seen yet, and very much appreciate your time this afternoon. I'll hand it over here in a moment to Ms. Bo Pulsing, and she's going to be the facilitator for the session this afternoon. I would say to start with, we're following this up from the discussion we were able to have with council before Christmas, and I think a good discussion. It would happen to be in person at that time, and I know as staff we took away a lot of appreciation of your time and discussions and comments we were able to have, and this session is built a little bit on that and some of the questions that were left to be answered. Unfortunately, we were hoping to have you all together in person and do something very similar again today, but with COVID, I think we've decided that moving our meetings online is the best approach, at least for the immediate future. And I just want to acknowledge staff who were doing a ton of work over Christmas trying to get us ready for an in-person workshop, who had to turn on a dime and quickly adjust. And I think I think adapt, respond, and carry on is the unofficial motto of the Reimagine process at this point. But they've done great work, and I think they're looking forward to this afternoon to spending some time with you. I'll let Lisa to explain a little bit more of the afternoon and the opportunity for questions, but I would strongly encourage council to take the opportunities to ask those questions, to give us feedback on items as they come up, and all of this, as Lisa will explain, will help us inform the plans as we prepare them and be in a place to introduce them to you, hopefully next month now. So with Ms. Bo Pulsing this afternoon, you'll hear primarily from Ms. McDonald and Ms. Begin, both of our community planning section, and happy to have them participate. So I'll turn it over to Ms. Bo Pulsing. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Lindsay. So if you bear with me, I am a technical facilitator today, amongst other things. So I'm just going to start sharing our screen here so that you can.
Oh, I think we share the wrong one.
And
Screen 2.
okay, so you should see in front of you, Reimagine, Welcome Emerging Directions. And before I get too far into this, as Mr. Lindsay said, the purpose of this is to, as council will recall, you are the steering committee for Reimagine. And as part of this, we have some key topics that we really would appreciate your feedback and discussion on. So I'll explain the format in a minute, but before we start, I'm going to turn over to Chair Councillor Bonner to just do a traditional territory acknowledgement related to our process. Thank you.
And we would like to respectfully acknowledge that the Reimagine planning process includes lands within the traditional territory of the Coast Salish peoples, including the traditional territories of the Snuneymuxw and Snuneymuxw First Nations. Thank you.
Thank you. So as Mr. Lindsay said, this is going to be a very interesting session where we have pivoted on a dime, and many thanks to both Cash and Kirsty, who you'll be hearing from. And I won't run through these, you've got them on your screen, but these are the 6 topic areas that we would really like your feedback on. And in terms of format, what we're going to do is, instead of to move us through quickly, we'll be using Zoom polls and asking for your feedback on all of the land use sections. And then in the interest of time, where you are all comfortable, we don't need further discussion. We can leave those pieces aside. And then during the break, we will go through the ones that we see you needing more discussion or to give us more feedback on. So what we ask is if you could jot down any comments you have as we go through the land use section that you might want to raise when we come to the discussion portion. So, and we'll help guide you through those pieces. So with that, I am going to quickly show you, you've seen this before. This is for members of the public who might have seen our phase 2 engagement results in terms of the 3 different scenarios that were presented to the community. What we've got here is we asked our community for feedback on 3 different scenarios for future growth to accommodate all the different goals and shifts that we need to make as a community. And where we landed is on a hybrid approach between scenarios 2 and 3, one of which is mobility hubs based on the Transportation Plan of 2014 and a centralized focus. And both our intent here is looking at how we can accelerate some of the work that is underway and is working well from our current community plan, and then accelerating it to address different goals that council and the community have set for us. So ongoing emphasis on the importance of downtown, seeing that become a thriving center, improved access to daily needs and reducing reliance on personal vehicles, increasing affordable housing options, and really integrating our mobility options to make complete compact communities. So what I'm going to show you next is our Drought consolidated scenario. And what we're going to be going through with you today at a high level is the different land use categories in more depth, and giving you an opportunity to give us feedback to see if we're on the right track before we return to the public with a draft for their feedback on. So what you can see here is a draft consolidated scenario. You have seen this information before, and we'll have some specific questions for you around some pieces that we'd like your direction on. So what you can see here is the focus on limiting the expansion of residential growth, keeping that into some core centers in our community, prioritizing the downtown area, and supporting growth in other hubs. And you can see them there: Woodgrove, the Nanaimo North Town Centre, Country Club, the Hospital Area University, and the Southgate area. And then recognizing the linkages of our key corridors to support growth, and really focus our commercial activity and reduce the the heavy reliance on vehicles in our community. And then looking at our neighborhoods as maintaining lower levels of density than the core areas where we want to see more growth. So we're continuing to refine this draft, And your help today will help us do that in preparation for launching and going to the community for their feedback. So with that, I would like to turn over to Kirsty McDonald, who will be going over a high level of the different land use categories. And as I mentioned, we'll be pausing at the end of each one, giving you an opportunity through a Zoom poll to let us know, are we on the right track? Are we not? Do we need further discussion? And with that, I will let Kirsty take it from here.
Thank you, Lisa. So our next set of slides with these 5 land use categories correspond to a package that you should have received in your agenda with a table, a summary table. And I'm just pointing that out because if you'd like to refer to it as we're going through this hour or so of slides, it's a really good reference. And it also will correspond by color to a future map that you will be getting probably at our next GPC or definitely in February, in the month of February, but the colors will correspond to the different colors on that land use map as well. Next slide, Lisa, thank you. The first area is a new primary urban center. And this is a focus of the downtown core. Lisa had showed you that draft consolidated map that showed 7 centers, 6 were secondary centers, and 1 is the primary center. So this really focuses on some of the land uses that would be just in the downtown and really highlight that the downtown is the city's distinct cultural, economic, and mobility hub with a high density and the highest density of residential units as well as mix of uses. And it services really a citywide function. It's not just a neighborhood, but it focuses on services for the entire city. And typical building forms in this area include a mix of ground floor commercial, mid and high-rise apartments, and a range of uses, including a lot of public spaces, civic and institutional uses, and office and mixed commercial use. And we'll be delving into the heights later in the presentation, but the heights do vary in this downtown core up to 12 stories in specific locations. And we'll get into more detail in that on a future slide. And next, we're moving into secondary urban centers. And again, the draft consolidated map that Lisa showed you had 6 secondary urban centers noted: Woodgrove, Nanaimo North Town Center, Country Club, the hospital, VIU, and Southgate. And these are really large-scale centers that act as mobility hubs, and they pick up on some of the land use and language that was in the 2014 Transportation Master Plan, as well as they are reflected in the existing official community plan as well, but we've reduced the number of them down to 6 in order to really focus where infrastructure goes, where the transit hubs and integration go, and also to match up with what the regional district is doing for frequent and rapid transit over the next several years. And typical building forms here are very similar to what they were in the primary urban center downtown, with low and mid-rise apartments, mixed use with commercial ground floor uses and residential above, and a multitude of public and civic spaces as well integrated. And this next slide really illustrates what an example of one of these urban centers might look like in time as they're built out, and also what it might feel like. The goal is that it becomes a really vibrant space, and it's a place that people want to gather, work, and play. And it integrates all of our Reimagine goals, such as compact walkable communities, green infrastructure. It includes activities and fun elements, and it's really a human-scaled development. And this brings us to one of our pauses in the presentation where we'd like to try a technique with a Zoom poll and just check in with you to see if this topic, if the direction we're taking it is what you are hoping to see, and also if it warrants future discussion further into our presentation. So in a moment, there's going to be a question on your screen come up.
Okay. Hi, everyone. We have reached our first technical difficulty. Sheila?
I can pull it up for you if you'd like.
Okay.
And Councillor Turley has his hand up. I'm sorry about that, Lisa.
Okay.
I'm just
I can
seeing
see.
that now.
Yes.
Go ahead, Councillor Turley.
Thank you.
You're muted, sir.
Okay, can you hear me now? No?
Yes, I can
Okay.
hear you now.
Perfect. Okay. Thank you, Chair. Through you to staff. Is this the appropriate time to ask questions around these, or is there going to be another opportunity for this specific topic? Your concerns.
Through the chair to Councillor Turley, what we're asking is if you could just respectfully hold your questions till the end so we can try and move through. So just make a note.
That's fine. Yep, no problem.
And then the Zoom poll will tell us how we do. So we've had a slight technical difficulty, but we should be able to, I hope, do the Zoom poll. And actually, because we're having a technical difficulty, we're going to do the old-fashioned method, which is a raise of hands. So this is for council members only. And I might ask for a bit of help from Ledge, who might be able to see more of the screen than I can right now. So you have three choices. This is a temperature check. On what you've just seen, does it look good? And can we keep going with this direction? Your next choice is you're still deciding, but you have some questions. And your third choice is you have some concerns about this emerging direction. So I'm going to go and ask for a raise of hands who, those of you, does this look good, the direction we're going, and can we keep going?
Lisa, I was able to have the poll go live, so
okay.
Yes,
I'm receiving responses right now, so I'll just give everybody about 10 to 15 more seconds, and then we'll move on. Okay, I'll be ending the poll right now. And these are the results that we received. So we had 33% of participants say it looks good, keep going. And we had 67% of participants said still deciding, have some questions. So we will discuss this further on after the land use designation section.
And thank you very much, Kasia, for rescuing us on that one.
Happy to help.
Okay.
Could I just ask a quick question, Lisa? I'm sorry. I'm just seeing, I'm only seeing 6 votes, but I'm seeing 2, 4, 6, 8 members of mayor and council.
Okay, so maybe, have we closed the poll, Kasia? Is it possible to reopen it?
Let me try. Let me see if I can do that again.
And Kasia, I know you're in a different room, but the way it's working is I actually can't see the poll at all. So I will require your eyes. So everybody else can see it except me because I'm sharing the other screen.
Okay, I will relaunch the poll. Everyone will have to provide their answers again, please.
Okay, thank you for your patience, everyone.
You should now see the poll on your screen.
If you don't see the poll, please let everyone know.
Yes.
Please. I have 7 of 8 counselors, so we're waiting for one more.
I may interrupt and say thank you for bearing with our Luddites.
Yes. I think Councillor Hemmons might need to vote again. They relaunched it, Councillor Hemmons.
I have 8 of 8 now, so we're good.
Okay,
I'm going to share the results. Okay, so now we have 38% saying looks good, keep going, and we have 63% requesting some additional questions. So our team will take a note of that and move on to the next topic. Lisa, on to you.
Okay, so I'll hand this back over to Kirsty now to get into our next topic with the key emerging directions we want your feedback on. Thanks, Kirsty.
Thank you. Next topic is land use corridors. And in the current OCP, we actually have almost 500 hectares of land that are designated corridor. And most of this is on major arterial streets, as well as some of our highway corridors. And in the draft consolidated version of the land use plan, we've made some considerable changes in this particular designation. And we've actually reduced the amount of corridor by about half. And we've divided it up into 2 different types. And this has been partly because of a land use inventory that was done by Colliers in 2020, and it indicated that there was an overabundance of commercial spaces, and it recommended actually focusing where land use that fits that corridor designation happens more. And we've also tried to align the corridor designation with the primary, frequent, and rapid transit routes as well. On the next slide, we'll go through the two different types of corridor designation. And they include a mixed-use corridor. Lisa, if you could advance the slide, please. Thank you. A mixed-use corridor designation, which is primarily ground floor commercial services that it's focused on, and also more of a transitionary residential corridor, which might include a little bit more than residential, but it really is a bridge between some nodes with mixed use along the corridors. So a really good example of this mixed use corridor type, we'll be showing you a map in a future slide, but a good example would be the corner of Dufferin and Bowen Road along Bowen, where there's the McDonald's, Country Grocer, TD Bank, and the Rexall all together, and it's in a really walkable kind of compact look, fairly new. And that's the idea of what we want to achieve in this mixed use residential corridor, where buildings really focus on ground floor commercial, varied heights, but up to about 6 stories. Residential is in the upper stories, and really a mix of uses with small plazas and walkable spaces between them. And then again in the residential corridor, focusing on mid to low rise apartments and really providing townhouses and building forms that transition between the mixed use areas, typically similar heights of 3 to 6 stories, with also really walkable feel and parks, plazas, and open spaces connecting them. And this is a map that highlights a snippet of what'll be in the new hybrid land use scenario when you see it in detail. And it shows that mixed use residential corridor in the orange, and the one that says Bowen Road and it's highlighted in orange is that corner of the McDonald's, the Rexall, the Country Grocer on Bowen Road that I was mentioning, which we feel is a really good example of that mixed use corridor and how it can be built out. With as you move up towards Forest Park School through that brown, you're going through more of a mixed use residential area, and then back to around Northfield, Meredith, the Columbia Bakery, some of the bakeries that are there where there's, again, that mixed use feel. And that's an example of what we'd like to see integrated along many of our major corridors, although we have reduced the number by about half in this current version of the official community plan. And now we're going to try another poll again and see if this is hitting the mark with you, either virtually or by a show of hands.
Please let me know if you see the poll on your screen. Anybody see it right now?
Not yet, Kesha.
I'm still seeing the old poll. So
you have to close it, Sheila.
Okay.
There is a close function.
Gotcha.
Okay, I'm relaunching the poll.
Looks good.
Thank you. All right, I have 8 of 8 counselors, and I'm going to share the results. So we received 6 out of 8 counselors were said that it looks good and keep going, and we had 2 out of 8 counselors that had additional questions. Okay, I'm going to keep moving on. Next slide, please, Lisa. All right, so we will now be discussing the neighborhood designation and what they feel like. There are 5 designations, which include Neighborhood Center, Old City Heritage Neighborhood, Core Neighborhood, Neighborhood, and Low Density. Next slide, please. Thank you. So currently termed Neighborhood Commercial Center The intent of the neighborhood center designation is to act as a neighborhood gathering and service destination for local residents. In regards to the typical building forms, we're looking at mixed use with commercial ground floor, low to mid-rise apartments, townhouses, and heights between a minimum of 2 stories and up to 4 stories. The typical uses will be mixed use commercial and residential, limited standalone commercial, residential in apartment formats, and parks, plazas, and open space institutional. And some examples of neighborhood centers would include Departure Bay, Jingle Pot, and University Village. Next slide, please. All right, so we'll take a poll on neighborhood centers. All right, the poll should now be live. We're just waiting for one more counselor to provide their response. There we go, thank you. Okay, so we have 5 out of 8 counselors saying looks good, keep going. And we have 3 out of 8 counselors that have some additional questions. Okay, thank you everybody. On to the next topic. All right, so the Old City neighborhood is recognized as one of the oldest neighborhoods with unique heritage value and historical buildings. In 2008, the OCP designated the area as neighborhood, supporting low density development. The existing Old City neighborhood plan was developed in 1992, and the emerging direction that we're looking at is to add an Old City neighborhood designation to recognize its unique character. The team is exploring options on policy in this area, including taking key policy directions from the neighborhood plan and inputting them into the city plan, referencing the neighborhood plan as a guidance document, but not as part of the OCP bylaw. This will be discussed further in the neighborhood plan section. And lastly, in addition to considering a future area plan for this neighborhood. Next slide, please. So the typical building forms that we will see in this designation include single unit dwellings with or without secondary suites, multi-unit dwellings, this includes triplexes, fourplexes, townhouses, and low-rise apartments, and heights up to 3 stories. And as you'll see, there's an asterisk related to the 3 stories, where potentially additional heights may be considered in strategic locations. Typical uses would include residential, home-based business, local servicing commercial, parks, plazas, open spaces, and institutional. All right, and we'll now seek your feedback on the Old City neighborhood designation. Okay, we now have all the results. So we have 3 out of 8 counselors saying looks good, keep going. We have 4 out of 8 counselors that have additional questions, and we have 1 counselor that is concerned with this emerging direction. Okay, next slide, please.
I'm just going to do a quick temperature check.
Okay.
And check with council that the way we're doing the polls, that you're clear on what we're asking you for in terms of the direction. Does it just a thumbs up? Let me know that there will be a chance for discussion at the end, but that it's clear what we're asking of you. Okay, perfect. Thank you.
Next slide, please. All right, next in the neighborhoods, we'll be talking about a big move, which includes a current approach based on our 2008 OCP, is for a single neighborhood designation that is primarily focused on ground-oriented uses. The current neighborhood designation characterizes much of the land base in Nanaimo, and the emerging direction is to explore adding a core neighborhood designation to encourage increased density and infill in areas close to urban centers and transit corridors. And the goal would be to encourage and support infill and densification in areas with easy walking or biking distances of services and transit. And there would continue to be a neighborhood designation to support primarily lower density ground-oriented housing. Next slide, please. So going into a bit more detail on the core neighborhood, the typical building forms we'll be looking at are single unit dwellings with secondary suites, multi-unit dwellings, triplexes, fourplexes, townhouses, and low-rise apartments, small-scale commercial and mixed use, and heights up to 4 stories, with the potential for up to 6 stories in strategic locations. Typical uses would include residential, home-based business, local servicing commercial, parks, plazas, open spaces, and institutional. And the objective of this designation is to act as a transition from higher density areas like an urban center and corridors to adjacent low density neighborhoods that we'll be discussing in the next slide. Next slide, please. So this is an example of Uplands Drive, a primarily residential area that is on a primary transit line and in close proximity to both Country Club and Nanaimo North Town Center. The recent development of row housing on Uplands Drive is a good example of the building forms and use that would be supported in this designation. And that's the image on the right there. Next slide, please. In regards to the neighborhood designation, the typical building forms we would be seeing are single unit dwellings with secondary suites, 2-unit dwellings, so duplexes, triplexes and fourplex townhouses, small scale commercial and mixed use, and heights up to 3 stories. And very typical uses would include residential, home-based business, local service, commercial, and parks, plazas, open spaces, and institutional. Next slide, please. And so here's an example of how the neighborhood designation would relate to the core neighborhood and then the urban center. This is predominantly a residential area off Waddington and Townsite and is further from services and transit hubs. So this map shows you the step-down approach that the core neighborhood would provide between the urban center of the hospital, which is shown here in red, and the neighborhood, which is shown in the yellow. The core neighborhood would be the mustard color. And to the right are examples of the different types of building forms that you would comprise the designation. So we have the mix of single family, duplexes, and triplexes. Next slide, please. So once again, we'll take a poll on both the core neighborhood designation and the neighborhood designation. Just waiting for one more counselor.
Be a bit late coming.
I think that Councillor Brown might be away from his computer right now, so I think 7 is what we're going to have for this poll.
Okay, appreciate that. Thank you. So the results are 4 out of 7 counselors. Looks good. Keep going. 2 had additional questions, and 1 was concerned with the emerging direction. Oh, sorry, I didn't show the results. There they are. Okay, I'm going to keep moving on. So now we have another big move, would be the creation of a new low density neighborhood designation. Currently, the location with significant physical, servicing, and emergency constraints are in the urban reserve or the neighborhood designation, and signaling the potential for development and the extension of services. However, we would be challenged for the city to adequately service those lands. And so the low density neighborhood designation would recognize existing development and density, but would not support significant urban density or guarantee full servicing within the lifetime of the city plan. Next slide, please. The typical building forms we would see are single unit dwellings and heights up to 2 stories, and typical uses, residential, live and work, agriculture, and open space. Next slide, please. So in addition, lastly, staff have identified areas requiring additional consideration through this process. The 3 locations being studied but not yet confirmed include remaining properties on Lindley Valley adjacent to Park, which are currently within the urban reserve designation, properties are at elevations that make it very difficult to service and build. The second one is Jingle Pot, which is currently within the urban reserve and has sewer servicing and road access limitations. And lastly is King/Calder Road, and currently in the neighborhood designation, and existing road access are greater than 26%, making road access very difficult for that area. So that sums up the low density. So once again, I will launch the poll. The poll has now been launched. Okay, I have all 8. So we have 7 out of 8 counselors that said looks good, keep going. And we had 1 counselor that still had some questions. Oh, sorry, I keep forgetting to share the results. There we go. Okay, I'm going to move on to industrial lands. Oh, this is actually Kirsty. Back over to you.
Thanks, Kasia. So we mentioned earlier that Colliers had completed a land use inventory for us in 2020, and industrial land was one of the areas that they cautioned us that we could in the future not have enough capacity for, and it was one of the areas that they identified, just making sure that we had between their estimates were 640 hectares to 727 hectares needed to accommodate the future land use needs for Nanaimo until 2041. And our current OCP identifies 585 hectares of land, excluding sandstone. The new hybrid consolidated scenario has 661 hectares of land. So we've been quite thoughtful to make sure that that land is accommodated for down the road, excluding sandstone. And a lot of that does come in the Ocean View area, in the Cedar area. We also are having the draft consolidated land use plan I looked at over the month of January through Colliers to make sure that future land use needs would be covered, just to confirm, because economically there's a lot of ties to the success of this industrial land being provided for in the future. In the next slide, we identify that there are 2 main types of industrial land use, and the 661 hectares includes both types, both more heavy industrial, which includes both industrial buildings and structures, and is typically a mix of warehousing, distribution, transportation, logistics, manufacturing, and processing, and also light industrial uses, which typically are up to about 3 stories in both buildings and structures, and also wrap into the land use different office and sales uses, equipment repairs, auto supplies, and the like. And the goal is really to integrate the industrial throughout the city and to make sure that we have enough to accommodate it so that it's not pushed outside of our limits over time in the regional district and in Lanceville as well. So more information to come about the details of the policies that would be in each of these industrial areas, as well as where they would be located. But just wanted to let you know that through our draft consolidated scenario, there is the future projections for industrial use are met, excluding the sandstone lands. And now we're moving into a poll to see if that direction is hitting the mark with you.
Okay, Kasia, over to you on this one.
Yeah, I just launched the poll. It's 6 of 8. Oh, there we go. And poll. All right, so we had 5 out of 8 counselors say looks good, keep going. 1 out of 8 still have some questions, and 2 are concerned with the emerging direction.
Okay, moving on. Our existing official community plan does include an example or a land use designation called Waterfront. And it's become more and more apparent that Waterfront designation is one of the things that makes Nanaimo really unique, and is something that through this version of the OCP, we've wanted to expand upon and adapt and also change some of the tone in the language around policies in the waterfront section. An example of waterfront, it varies by location and use, what's included, but it can include a wide range of uses, including public access facilities, trails, and recreation, as well as waterfront transportation, marine, industrial services and marinas, mixed use, ocean-focused industries, and residential uses. And an example of a change of where we're expanding this waterfront designation in the current version of the official community plan is in the top map here, the Assembly Wharf in front of Port Drive and extending all the way down to the Chase River estuary, where right now it's a mix of urban node and neighborhood. And one of the big moves in the current official community plan, or the draft official community plan, is that we'd be adding this waterfront designation to reflect the uniqueness of that area and this mix of range of uses that can be accommodated there, including accommodations that would be made to protect the unique sensitive environment of our waterfront. And also other areas that we talked about in a previous session, but are part of our land use designations at a high level, include parks and open space and resource management. And this includes, parks and open space includes all forms of city-owned land that's park, as well as some private open spaces that we value as green space and a natural area in the city, such as golf courses. And also in the resource management area includes natural areas as well as working forests and working agricultural areas, and also some non-designated parks, such as DL 56, where it's can be a working forest, but it is publicly owned. But these are just two other land use designations that we wanted to highlight for you that you will see in a future map.
I've launched the poll. All right, there we go. We have all 8 counselors. The results show that we have 6 out of 8 happy with the direction and 2 that have additional questions. Thank you for that.
So we've actually reached where we wanted to be as far as our timeline goes quite well through our land use designations. And we just wanted to take a quick pause and ask you a quick fun fact and get you your brains thinking in new ways. So our first question for you is, does anyone know, and you can shout it out as soon as if you know the answer, what year Nanaimo's first official community plan was adopted?
Do we say they're not allowed to look online?
I don't think the answer is online.
Ah, there we go.
1976.
Jim was there. He should know.
Any other guesses?
Okay, I think you can go for it, Kirsty.
Okay, well, you're very close. After amalgamation, there was the development of an official community plan, and it was brought forward to council in 1977, but it was not adopted. It was actually adopted in 79. And we're not sure what happened in that time period, but the first official community plan was adopted by the city of Nanaimo in 79.
Frank had to rearrange his real estate holdings.
You can amaze your friends at Trivia Nights with that information. Our staff team would like to take a short pause now, about 5 minutes, to just go through those poll results. And we're wondering if you want a stretch break while we look at what we should be discussing in the next half of our presentation.
Hey, as the chair, I think we'll just take a 5-minute break, and I'll see you guys back here shortly.
Thanks so much.
so much for your patience. And I just want to give huge kudos to Kasia and Kirsty for pivoting with our Zoom. This is actually quite a complex thing that we have going on, but hopefully it doesn't look that way. Okay, so we're going to get to the group discussion, and I'm just going to move us to the results of the poll. Oh, there we go. So you can see how you all voted in terms of, and so what we want to suggest here is that we prioritize discussion in order of the ones that look like they are generating the most concern for you. So the first one would be discussion on urban centers, followed by discussion on the old city neighborhood. And just to refresh you, this is agreement that we are on the right track. It looks good, keep going. Still deciding, have some questions, or have some big concerns about the moving direction. So in order again, urban centers would be the top priority for discussion today, followed by old city neighborhood. And then you can see neighborhood center, core neighborhood, and industrial lands also are the sort of third level priority for your discussion. Now we can discuss all of these, and what we're suggesting is that we just start off with the top ones. So through the chair, if you're good with that approach, we'll start.
I am, and I think to kick it off, we have Councillor Turley, unless anyone has an objection.
Was that a fair question? I'm assuming I'm unmuted. Yep. So my question on urban centers is, I heard some time ago that the difference in sidewalk width between the urban centers primary and the secondary was I forget what the numbers were, but it was significant. And I'm wondering what the reason for that is. Is it because they anticipate the primary ones is going to have a lot more people there, or just is there any through the staff any argument in favor of that, I guess is what I'm asking.
Okay. Through the chair to Councillor Turley, the question was around sidewalks related to the urban centers?
Yeah, the width of sidewalks.
Width of sidewalks. Okay, so I'm going to see if Jana Zielinski, who's online, as Leonard, might be able to help us with this one, because I don't think I have the exact answer for this.
I can get it later. It's not a panic, but just
okay.
I'm curious. So.
No, and thanks, Lisa. And I'll take a first attempt at addressing that. And so I think we may just have wires crossed a little bit. I don't actually think we are currently carrying a policy in the draft recommending wider sidewalk widths for the primary urban center over the secondary ones. The idea would be that they would be sufficiently wide in all locations matched with the anticipated use for those areas. So the main places that we're going to be seeing a lot of activity would have the widest sidewalks, but we would differentiate what happens in the downtown specifically would be more based on what's happening in the distinct area around those sidewalks.
Thank you.
Okay. And Councillor Bonner, would you like to share when you see people's hands up?
Yes, sure. Next we have Councillor Brown and then Councillor Thorpe.
Thanks, Chair. With some of the designated or the potentially designated growth centers, I had trouble answering them just because I'm not sure on and I'm sure the analysis has been done, but not having the information of how much potential land and units they unlock in comparison with growth numbers is, I don't know if there's too many or not enough and that sort of thing. So, while I intuitively want to, support some of the areas where growth is occurring, and obviously the downtown, make no secret there, that's something that I support and want to see further densified. I just wonder if, for example, and I'm not picking anyone up just for example's sakes, if Woodgrove, Northtown Center, Country Club, Hospital, all of them got developed, I wonder, okay, do we need Woodgrove? And if we didn't have that, would it see over the next 25 to 50 years further development at those other nodes and make them more viable? That's what I'm just wondering. So not having that information of real estate projections and population growth and how much each of these destinations would unlock, I don't really feel equipped to answer my preference in an educated way.
Okay, I think Jana, maybe you and I can tag team on this one. What we were looking to do here is look at not only where existing growth has been established in terms of commercial and residential, those higher densities, but assigning both what we know may be coming down the pipeline, for example, Wood Grove is one such area, and recognizing that, and then looking at using the feedback that we got from the community around making downtown really thrive, and how could we do that? And so one of the ways of doing that and trying to avoid that, I guess, dilution effect of not getting any critical mass of development in one area was to try this approach. I think one of the challenges we have is that there are times where we cannot always control the pace at which a landowner or property owner developer actually chooses to proceed. But one of the things that we hope that council has the ability to do through this process and prioritizing action plans is to say, okay, if we know that we need more infrastructure in one area to make it easier for development to happen here first versus another area, what can we do to provide the conditions that make it likely that we get that, those critical masses of population? Jana, I don't know if you've got anything else to add in terms of the technical analysis that was done to look at this distribution.
Thanks, Lisa. And I think you answered that very well. I think that's one of the biggest challenges in any kind of city plan process is that we're trying to make sure that we have opportunities, so provide opportunities. We always want to have more potential for desirable areas to develop than we actually need, so we don't plan to the nth degree. Options and opportunities so that we can be responsible. Okay? But then also making sure that we're doing everything we can to avoid that dilution effect. One of the policy areas that we're exploring currently is the idea of resources and prioritization.
Jana, can I just, sorry to interrupt, no. You're actually quite faint. I wonder if you can move your microphone up a little closer to your mouth.
Is that better?
Yes, brilliant. Okay. Thank you.
Apparently I didn't do any Zooming over Christmas, so I'm not used to it. And so the idea is with us, one of the things we're currently exploring is prioritization tools and policy that could help us to better direct our resources and our planning efforts in order to support development in specific urban nodes faster, and try to use that as a prioritization way, as opposed to limiting or not designating them as areas that we know that are going to develop eventually. So I don't know if I added a bunch to that, Lisa, but
yeah,
the working effort.
I think maybe we could check in with Councillor Brown and others to see if there's a better way we can answer this. And I see Mr. Lindsay may have a comment as well.
Lisa, I'm just wondering if you or Jana might be able to help with the discussion. I think there was two parts, maybe to Councillor Brown's question. The first is the capacity of our land use, and do we have the ability to accommodate the next 40,000 in these nodes? So if we can touch on that. I also think it's somewhat difficult to have a discussion about the development of these nodes and the prioritization of these nodes without talking about the change in the corridors we're doing. Because it's a balance off between seeing development in the corridors versus the nodes. And we've talked earlier today about kind of rethinking some of our corridor approaches and what that would mean for the town center. So maybe if I can have you guys comment on that.
Maybe I'll wait for Councillor Brown to follow up.
Yeah, thanks. Just maybe to try to look at the question another way is, has analysis been done? So, and I think Mr. Lindsay, thanks for bringing up the corridors, because I think that brings an interesting element. So I'm just going to make the numbers up completely here, but say we're anticipating 50,000 people over the life of this plan, let's talk in units. Say we anticipate needing 50,000 units over the life of this plan, but between what's being unlocked in the corridor designations and some of the land use, or the corridors and nodes, is there potential for 100,000 units? So what I'm trying to get at is, what is and Jana, you touched upon it there, but what is the fuzziness in the analysis here about not trying to be overly prescriptive, but also trying to only unlock enough lands to provide some adaptability and flexibility, but without having a high probability of dilution in terms of density.
Yes, and so just as a reference, the number that we're actually working with is a population addition of 40,000 over the next 25 years, which was from the land inventory. And so one of the steps that we've been doing, and we did this originally after we did the first 3 scenarios, was a population analysis that allocated growth into the different parts of the community based on the land uses that are designated. There is more than enough capacity within the community under all of our land use designations to accommodate that growth. And by tweaking our land uses, we're able to direct it or move it into different areas a little bit more effectively. And so through some of our changes, including being very specific about reducing the amount of corridors, the effect is to try to push some of that and direct some of that capacity into our urban centers and do a better job of that. So one of the next steps that we are looking at is rerunning those numbers and seeing what the outcomes are in terms of the likelihood of different areas of development. But a lot of it is very much dependent on the developability of lands. And so it makes a lot of assumptions on what is the current use of the land and is it likely going to redevelop in the next 25 years? And it's not a perfect science. And so we say we have capacity and we, based on looking at the lands we have today, we make a lot of assumptions and say that yes, likely it will develop in a way that brings a lot more growth into our urban centers rather than spreading it out. So I think there's more work for us to do in that area. And I think that's helpful feedback to understand maybe if we can answer that a bit more specifically to help make decisions.
Yeah, and if I could follow up through the Chair to Councillor Brown, Christy McDonald mentioned that we were going back to Colliers now that we have this hybrid, to get them to run the growth scenarios and our land capacity. And so we hope to have that, I'm looking at my team, in the next few weeks. And so that will help us. And then one of the other pieces I wanted to mention is the changes like Ocean View, as well as other pieces, also are part of that effort to look at capacity. And the other piece is, which is a challenge for us, and it's been with the current OCP, is that while land might have the capacity for a certain density in an area where we want to see it, a developer may underbuild. And so we're looking at policies that may not only look at maximums, but potentially minimums. So Jana, I don't know if you want to speak a little bit to where we've looked at that, because I think, Councillor Brown, that is really one of our big challenges in Nanaimo, where land is still, despite the recent property assessments, it's still relatively cheap compared to other urban centers. And in terms of the profit margins for certain developers, there still may be choices to underbuild units.
Thanks, Lisa. And that is something that we are looking at on the policy side of things, is to encourage or require more intensive levels of development in the areas that we really want to see it. For example, the downtown area. And so doing that through a policy approach, because one of the risks, I think, of spreading ourselves again too thin is having less intensive development in the areas that we're hoping to see more intensity come forward.
Thank you so much. And Chair, if I may just ask one follow-up based on one. Perfect. They answered most of my questions wonderfully, so thank you. It was mentioned that an existing or independent, or not independent, but connected, but as a separate policy piece to help influence growth, there was the idea around infrastructure planning and putting in place using a variety of those tools. And one thing I'm just wondering, and I'm not looking for specifics here, but would the idea be that the different corridors or the different nodes would have some sort of hierarchy to them of when that infrastructure planning or implementation might occur, rather than, so some might be sooner and then others would be later?
Through the Chair to Councillor Brown, exactly. That is something that we hope to bring for you in a future GPC, is that those infrastructure implications. And so again, that work is being done looking at the consolidated scenario, so you can understand what it would take to help centers in terms of timing evolve in a way we want. So we get a critical mass downtown, critical mass at Woodgrove, and what role we have to play as a city in terms of prioritizing the infrastructure upgrades that may be needed in those centers to facilitate that development happening faster in one area than another. So we hope to, all being well, and perhaps I shouldn't promise it, try and look at that at our next GPC review, which is coming up towards the end of January.
Okay, thank you. And would a policy piece being explored that goes along with that be things like city-led zoning, or is it too early to say what those policies might be?
With that, I think we have gone back and forth on that one, if I recall, team. In terms of updating the zoning to match what's adopted with the draft city plan?
Correct. And in those places where you've gone ahead with the infrastructure as well.
Right. Well, I think there's two pieces of that policy wording that we would have that talks about how we would prioritize the infrastructure, and then other areas where it would be more the onus on the developer, particularly in areas where we know there are challenges and where we're reluctant to invest in infrastructure because it's not serving our overall goals. And then the other piece is in terms of the first part of what you were saying with infrastructure is coming back to you with what the analysis looks like from our engineering department. So they have been working on the 3 scenarios, but now we have the hybrid. We have to fully understand what that looks like and means. And in terms of the zoning, sorry, that was actually your first part, that would, once we have your clear direction on city plan, and this would literally come after you've considered the public input in phase 3, right? Right now, what we're trying to do is get you, are you comfortable enough with what we're going to give to the public for their feedback? And then once you get that feedback and we finalize the city plan and bylaw, then the next step would be what changes do we need to make to the zoning to match this? And do we do it as part of a zoning bylaw review, or as when people come along and they apply for their zoning? I think there's two choices there.
Okay, so to be determined is the answer.
Yeah, yes, sorry.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right. Perfect. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Councillor Brown, and now to the ever so patient Councillor Thorpe.
Thank you, Chair, very much. And if I may, I do have a question specific to this topic, and then a general comment that I would like to make. Regarding this one, some clarification, if I may. Under primary urban center, if I understood correctly, we would be suggesting that only be applied to the downtown area, and that the height restriction or height allowance for buildings could possibly be 12 stories or higher. But at a recent council meeting, it seems to me that we just gave the go-ahead for buildings of higher than 8 or 9 stories at the Green Thumb development. So I'm a little confused about that dichotomy. Could staff help me out on that? How can we be suggesting only one primary urban center with that height of building when at the same time we're proceeding in an opposite direction?
Okay, I'm wondering if this is going to get us into our next 2 agenda item topics on building height, Kirsty.
I think so. Perhaps we can wait till we get to those slides.
Would you mind if we took note of your question and we addressed it as part of the second part of our presentation, where we get
absolutely. And I just thought maybe I misheard or was misunderstanding, so I'll happily defer. But if I may, I would like to offer my other comment. And you just addressed it slightly, Ms. Bhopal Singh. So through the chair, what I just want to say is that if I'm understanding what we're doing today correctly, all we're doing is looking for general approval to put these changes or ideas or concepts in front of the public. Because quite frankly, all of us might have a different philosophy on urban centers or waterfront uses or green spaces or what have you. What I'm concerned about is not what we think, not what I feel even, but what the public thinks. So although I have some questions and even some concerns about some of these topic areas, I'm still comfortable with having what you're proposing put in front of the public. I want to hear from the public first. I want to get their response. And then at that point, council can have a debate about whether we want to go along with what the public feels is right or whether we want to override that. which becomes a political decision, which is quite right. So I just want assurance that although we are called a steering committee, I don't want to be seen as steering the results of this process. I want these ideas out there for the public to give their response. So I would appreciate a comment on that, Ms. Paul Singh. And please, I don't mean any disrespect. I know all the work that you're putting into this, but I think it's really important that the public understands that Reimagine Nanaimo is a public process to get public feedback. Thanks.
Through Chair Bonner to Councillor Thorpe, that's absolutely correct. Now, we could have, as staff, based on professional kind of evaluation, come out with a draft. However, the important thing is that we had some really key things that we felt it was really important to just run by you and see, because in a way you are our test case as representative of the community. And so if there's any key issues or questions, we know that we're going to have to either explain it differently or come tweak what we're coming back to the public with. And very much, this isn't about council providing any decisions. It's about, as exactly as you said, are you comfortable with this is the direction we're thinking that we're going to go out to the community with for their response on. And then once you get their feedback, then we come back, we do some more work and say, okay, we didn't consider this. The community is really in favor. They're not in favor. We've had, I think, pretty good feedback from the community in terms of a fairly close tie between scenarios 2 and 3 and the suggestions of hybriding them. And this is our attempt to marry it and go out to the community to say, okay, did we get it right? Based on what you've said, based on our technical expertise. And then, yes, council will have to take that feedback from phase 3 and decide, what are you going to support based on that feedback and all the other inputs that we're giving you. So thank you for raising that, because it's something that we were hoping to emphasize that that's what this was about, and not about making any decisions, because we still haven't even got to phase 3 yet. So.
Right. Thank you very much. I just wanted that assurance. Thank you.
Councillor Gusselbrock.
I think you're muted.
Thanks, Chair. My question is just in terms of the dialing between the two scenarios, this hybrid approach. How much is scenario 2 and how much is scenario 3? Like, what would it look like if we dialed an even greater focus on the downtown and directing development there? Like, is that possible to do, and what policies would that draw in? And just how are we finding that balance? How do we come to the balance between the two, and how will that be sought?
Okay, Councillor Gasselberg, it's probably for those watching and who may have given feedback into these scenarios. There was a fairly even tie between 2 and 3, with slightly more, but not much more support for 3. And so, yes, you could give more focus to downtown by really dialing down the focus on as many mobility hubs. And however, what we've tried to do is reflect the fact that we do have this long linear city. And we do know that we have existing nodes, and many who feel that by focusing only on the downtown core, that might cause a lack of amenities and other developments. For example, in some of these other ones that we've put in the hybrid. Jana, I don't know if you've got anything to add to this, because you were a good part of helping us narrow down to this consolidated option. And Councillor Gaspar, the interesting thing will be to see from the community, particularly those who took hours of their time to give us quite in-depth feedback on the 3 different scenarios, if how we've addressed this is going to be what we think will help create a more vibrant downtown, minimize dilution, and so we get these really complete centers that we've got here with the secondary urban centers. And the other thing to remember is, much like the 2008 OCP, is every 10 years we have a shot at reviewing how things are going and evaluating and adjusting our policies to suit. So while we hope this plan is a pretty solid one that guides us for the next 25 or so years, doesn't mean that it's not reviewed every 5 years and then a major review every 10 years, which is actually what we're doing here. Jan, I don't know if you've got any other thoughts to respond.
Thanks, Lisa. I'll just add one. And I think, the idea with the round 3 engagement is our opportunity to check in and to say, do we support these general directions? Are we heading down a good track? And we may come back with an updated scenario that looks at potentially redesignating some of the secondary centers as we've shown them in this plan based on what we hear. So I think it's a chance to, what we've tried our best to do is take some of the best pieces that the community appreciated most about each of those, put them into one, but then have an opportunity for the community to try that on and give us feedback on what their experience is now that we've combined them together.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, I think my concern is just that the dilution effect that, if we don't pick a few winners, I mean, like we've winnowed it down a little bit, but even this seems spread out that we're not going to achieve a model of sort of a development pattern that is going to reflect, the upcoming challenges that we need and have that greater density and that type of the transportation and access to amenities, that we won't have a working model for people to see that it works in time to really focus in that direction, and we'll just continue on, just spread out if we have too many of these nodes. And I guess I was just curious how that was decided. So I think I just share a concern that I would almost like to see a bit more focused on the downtown.
Okay, thank you. And maybe I can just follow up with that. We really did try and take the feedback that we got in phase 2 into consideration with the wider community. And this is part of the balancing act for council is, yes, we've heard this feedback. However, if council wants to look at a different direction or look at policies, as Councillor Brown was saying about, how could we look at ensuring getting those critical masses and not having a little bit everywhere, but getting one complete first. I think you're saying the same thing in a different way, but what's our role in influencing that? Because even if we were to go with a more centralized focus, which would be scenario 3 that you see on your screen, really focusing on the downtown and a sort of triangle here, even if that's what the community and you also make a final decision on, the effectiveness of that is still around, we have all these landowners with existing zoning, with existing opportunities that can really influence whether or not this actually does take off or everything happens here first. So I think the important piece for council is to decide, okay, what role do we have in terms of the provision of services and conditions that facilitate the likelihood of one center really evolving first, being the downtown, and then the others also evolving in a way that helps us. So it's really not an exact science, and it is something that I think we played with corridors in 2008. I think that was quite successful, but then we saw perhaps too many of them, and again a watering down of the effect of the commercial centers along that. And we've now come back with a tweak to that, which should, we hope, help the existing centers. So I'll pause there and see if that, I think what council is going to have to do is help us decide, is this good enough for the community to give feedback on? And then, as a council, you decide how you think you direct us going forward.
Thanks for that. Do we have anybody else that would like to make some comments? Councillor Martman.
Thank you. I just, my concern came about with the old city plan, right? The old city neighborhood being so close that it's actually part of the primary urban center. And how that ends up fitting together, because I think the primary urban would have higher stories and then it showed in the old city, yet we just gave approval to what I believed was higher stories.
Okay. Councillor Martman, I'm wondering if we could save that for the height discussion. And I actually am going to move us on to our next topic, if that's okay. Although I see another question on urban centers before we go.
Councillor Hemmons. No? Yeah, okay. Yeah, we can go on to the other topic. I do have some questions about nodes in general, but let's go on to the next topic.
Okay. And just bear with me while I whip through here. I'm working with multiple screens and I should know which one comes next.
I believe it is the Old City.
It is. Okay, great. Okay, so again, we had 3 of you comfortable with the approach of integrating the Old City neighborhood plan into the land use designations, 4 wanting more discussion, and 1 quite concerned. So if we could, and I'll try and pull up the slides related to that, and I'll ask, the whole team will help answer this one.
Go ahead, Your Worship. You're first.
Thank you very much, Chair. I appreciate that. And one thing I just want to raise, I mean, as you know, there was considerable neighborhood reaction to the initial proposal for the old hospital site. And many people point out the beauty and value of the old city buildings and housing, et cetera. And I know we have heritage designation, et cetera, et cetera. But I'm just wondering, has staff given any consideration to perhaps even recommending to council, and I'm not asking for this necessarily, but whether or not we would provide some permanent form, if you will, of tax relief to houses or residences in the area that would encourage them seeking a heritage designation, which would of course have the impact of restricting their redevelopment over time. In other words, is that historic part of Nanaimo and its architecture beautiful and wonderful enough that we want to take some extra step to preserve it, recognizing that you can find lovely historic houses, structures throughout the city, but let's be blunt, most of them or many of them are concentrated in these blocks. And they have been for a long time, and many people have gone obviously to great expense to fix them up and improve them, and not necessarily with heritage designation behind them, just because they're, interested homeowners who value historic structures. So I just throw that out as a general discussion. I'm not advocating for it, but I think it does respond to the neighborhood's concerns and also recognizes the beauty and importance of that historic old part of the city to the community generally.
Okay, so I'll start on this and I'll ask for backup from the team. So what we're looking at here is designed to help recognize that unique nature of this area of the city. And in terms of policies around designations and encouraging homeowners to do that, you do know that we have a heritage register, of course. Now, that doesn't mean that somebody cannot amend that site. It doesn't lock them in forever because it's our own. It's not. There's not many that are part of the provincial register, which is where there's a higher level of protection. I'm wondering, actually, I'm looking on my screen. I can't see everybody.
I believe Chris is on the call.
Okay, that's what I'm looking for. Mr. Schulberg. Sorry, go ahead.
If I may, Chair, just to be clear, what I'm thinking of is this. For instance, if you go to the west end of Vancouver, there are houses there that are surrounded by skyscrapers, literally. And I'm not talking about just the existing heritage designation, which I get. I'm talking about some longer, something more permanent that really will preserve these forever if in fact people are willing to accept that essentially they are not going to get the benefit of real estate values increasing over time, because let's face it, who really wants to be surrounded in an area with the most beautiful place there, but it's only worth a quarter or a half or whatever, I pull this figure out of the air, of the adjoining properties. So it's a little beyond heritage designation. It's looking at it as almost like a park-like designation.
I think that is our hope, is that we can look at this area holistically instead of site by site. And have some sympathetic developments so that we get the kind of info that we want walking distance to our primary urban center. And one of the unique things about this neighborhood is not only its heritage designation, but its proximity to transition areas, to the university, walking, cycling, busing, and then our downtown and our waterfront. And so how can we encourage sympathetic infill in that area? And that's one of the things that we have an opportunity to do, I think. And I see Mr. Lindsay here, and I think I'd like to give him an opportunity to speak with his experience.
Thank you. And I think speaking to both what the mayor's talking to, and also hearing the earlier discussion about trying to compare this area to the downtown. So I think this map does a good job of showing that the area generally in pink is what we're thinking of as the primary urban center. I think Councillor Martman was asking the question, distinguishing between those two areas, with the blue being the old city neighborhood plan. And I think for many of the reasons that are being raised here, including those comments from your worship on historic and heritage buildings, is this recognition that this area needs some special attention and some special policy to it that would be unique from other neighborhoods in the city. And that could include policy around preservation of existing heritage buildings. I would suggest to you that the existing old city neighborhood plan is very much based on that, because it almost takes a block by block approach looking at those areas and trying to preserve the character in that area. So I think there's some policy that we can extract from that and bring into city plan. But I think just having a separate designation here is the primary tool to communicate to everyone that this area is different, this area is special, and there'll be some significant or different policies around that. Whether that policy could include things like incentives or other mechanisms to encourage preservations of heritage buildings or sensitive infill. Of course, council's aware that this entire area, including the downtown, is the only area that's currently within your tax exemption, 10-year tax exemption bylaw, for example. So there are tools definitely to incent, and some that we're using now. But I did want to just build on that point. I think it was Councillor Martman, that we're looking at this area of the upper area of the Old City Bowl very differently than the urban center in the pink here. So Thank you, Lisa.
Thank you. And if I could just quickly add something, if we don't have this particular designation here, we're then looking at having this as a general neighborhood designation or the neighborhood core. And there's implications for that in terms of different policies and heights and so forth that may change our respect for this area as it currently stands with view corridors and the heritage nature. So that would be something that I guess one of the things we should be asking you after we discuss this and answer questions is, are you still comfortable with this as the approach to go out to the community with, to see how they respond to it? The alternative would be to have it yellow as neighborhood, or a combination of yellow and the higher density infill transition core neighborhood, which would go against the, stepping down between the primary center. So this was our way of trying to say this is a very unique neighborhood. So I'll pause there because I see others with questions.
Go ahead, Councillor Brown.
Thanks, Chair. I don't have questions, but just some general comments. To Councillor Thorpe's point earlier, I'm highly supportive of this going up to the public for discussion. But sometimes I worry that some of the more interesting points or the nuances or the debate that maybe should occur in the public realm won't, because of a lack of familiarity with some of the processes and the technicalities that go along with it. And I raised, for example, so, obviously everybody loves heritage, but I think there's a natural tension there between the heritage of this particular neighborhood and then where you want to tend to see development for walkable, livable neighborhoods near the downtown, near the university, and sometimes heritage preservation then becomes the reason that type of development or infill to a degree doesn't occur. And so, I'll use one simple example from the existing neighborhood plan where, you could right now in theory buy a lot, tear the heritage house down and build a hyper modern single detached building. But if the same person wanted to come in, take 3 lots, then take 3 lots and do a multifamily, which is a little bit different and raises some more eyebrows, well, then they fall under the form and character development permit guidelines, and there's a better shot at seeing that heritage look preserved. Another example is when it comes to infill in this current neighborhood designation. Again, you could build a hyper-modern single-family dwelling unit and no questions asked. But if you wanted to build a duplex, you actually now have to take a development permit, and it's the only area in town for a duplex that I know of anyways that you have to do that. And it's actually a burden for some of the developers for actually wanting to build some infill because they have to go to design panel and all those sorts of things. So I only highlight that as, there's a tension that exists there between different value sets. And I'm interested in how this would be framed to the public, because I think everybody would raise their hand and say, yes, we support infill, yes, we support heritage. Mm-hmm. But then when it comes to the actual policy implementation, they might not have a clear understanding of what those tensions are and that what has to give in order to achieve something else in some cases. So that's my only concern about how we might receive feedback on this as we move through it.
I think through the chair to Councillor Brown and Jana, I'm so glad that you're listening into this, because this comes back to our communication to the public when we go out in phase 3. That if council is comfortable with our direction testing this out with the public, how we convey those different nuances in terms of, if we were to do this, this is what this means, versus having it as part of OCP level, general neighborhood, or another designation. So Councillor Brown, I think that's for us to take away and take your feedback and make sure that we are addressing that as part of how we're framing what we're asking the community to give us feedback on. And so, Jana, that might be some of the work we've done on kind of like the backgrounders on like some key things that we know, just like we're testing it out with council. We're saying to the community, okay, this is a big move. Here are things that we've always done. Generally we think we're on the right track. We've done it for a decade or more, but here's the things that are significant, and here are the implications. And our challenge, of course, is to reduce the planner speak so that everybody can understand what it is we're proposing, because this is a highly complex undertaking, and we've tried not to overwhelm our community, but gosh, they've done a fine job with actually taking the time to read a lot of materials and participate. So we'll take that feedback. Thank you.
Councillor Thorpe.
Thank you very much, Chair. First, I would just like to really echo the comments of Councillor Brown. How this is presented to the public, I think, is going to be very important. And I'm certainly in favor of having it go ahead to the public, and personally, I would support it. But I can quite easily see that if this is not presented carefully, there's going to be a response to the effect that, well, you're giving special treatment to one area of the city. And yes, the old city might have distinct characteristics, but so do other areas of the city. And I'm sure the good neighbors or the good residents of the Newcastle area will point to the character of their neighborhood and say that they have many heritage sites there and a real unique community feel. And I could point to other areas of the city as well. So again, I'm in favor of this going forward. I see what it's meant to do and the benefit it might bring, but I think how it's presented is going to be very crucial. Thank you.
Thank you. And I'm wondering through the chair, thank you for your feedback, Councillor Thorpe. I'm wondering through the chair. So what I'm hearing is, could I have a temperature check based on what we've said? Are you comfortable with us taking forward this particular designation? Okay, I see lots of nods. Okay.
I'm seeing that, yeah.
And then I wanted to just do a time check. There is a possibility, if you wanted to go over half an hour through Sheila Gurry in the chair, that's an option. We have 3 other land use designations that rank 3, where there's between 3 of you out of those who voted have concerns around neighborhood centers or want more discussion, core, neighborhood and neighborhood, and then industrial lands. So the other thing that we did also want to cover today was the integration of neighborhood plans and also building heights. And so in the next 25 minutes, I'd like to ask you, what would you like us to prioritize? We can continue through the land use designations and bump some of the other topics if we don't get to them by 3 o'clock. We do feel the building heights, I think it's come up a couple times, is definitely one. So I'm going to maybe ask the chair to help us figure out what your priorities are, whether you want to go over by half an hour, if that's feasible with Ms. Scurry or not. And then if you don't, how we spend our next 25 minutes together.
Well, I did have you down here till 3, at least.
Yes.
And so I'm fine with carrying on with the discussion. I know that a number of people have raised building heights is one of the topics of concern, mine too. So I don't mind moving along. I don't think our next 2 items on the agenda are huge time things.
No, Chair, just to that point, the agenda planning was going to be more of a let's talk about this in more detail at the next GPC. So I don't think that will take very long, and the AVICC resolution shouldn't take long because we haven't received any. So I think it's okay from this end of things.
Yeah.
Okay.
So let's carry on.
Okay. So so we can, here's in red, you can see we've covered off urban centers. We've covered off the Old City neighborhood, and then we've got these other 3 neighborhood centers and core neighborhood and neighborhood and industrial lands. So would you like to just carry on with the discussion on those 3 before we go into the next topics?
I think so, yeah.
Okay, all right. So I'm going to suggest that we start with industrial lands first, because we actually had 2 people who were quite unhappy with that direction. And so that looks like it warrants a bit more discussion, and then we'll do neighborhood center next, and then core neighborhood. So with that, I will move to the industrial lands section, and perhaps all of you can jump in with your comments related to that.
Councillor Turley, I think you're up first.
Okay, thank you, Chair. Mine again is more of a question on how properties are grandfathered with regard to this, and I see under the emerging directions of the city plan, car sales supported in Shenton Light Industrial Area only, whereas previously it was in the Boban area as well. And I believe, if my memory serves me correctly, well, that could be a challenging point at this point in time, the terminal avenue between roughly Bastion and Comox had been designated for auto-related industries, and I don't know if that got changed, or the existing businesses there are there on a grandfather basis, and if they are, what happens if the property sells?
Through the chair to Councillor Turley, first of all, nothing's been changed, so nothing's yet to be grandfathered, because this is again testing this out with the community. Number 2, I think I am going to ask for a little bit of assistance from Jana on this one. One of the things with the car sales, we're also trying to look forward, not only just what current uses are, but going forward into the future. What do we anticipate with trends around how car sales need land? And so, for example, we've seen the Tesla model where they need minimal space because of in areas because of how they're selling cars. People are looking online, they're just arranging for the cars to be test driven instead of being warehoused or stored in large parking lots along our corridors and urban centers. And then we also have this competition with a lack of industrial lands competing in some areas with what is essentially a retail use for car sales. So we're planning 25 years into the future how this type of retail or commerce will use land, and what's the best use of land in certain areas where we know we have the demand for industrial. So Jana, I don't know if you'd like to jump in, particularly around, there was a comment around the Terminal Avenue piece in Boban?
Yeah, thanks, Lisa. And thanks. This is a really good question and one we've been sorting through a little bit. It was actually the land inventory that told us a little bit more about some of the trends they're seeing. The land inventory that was done in 2020, and the anticipation is that the longer term, that our car sales, the way we handle car sales will change, which likely could free up some light industrial land for the city. In the meantime, obviously, we still need to manage that use and figure out where it's best located. So in the original OCP, they verbally mentioned that they should be designated to the Shenton and Boban light industrial areas. I think everybody knows we actually don't have any in the Boban area right now, and so part of that shift is protecting the Boban area to be very much an industrial area and continuing on in that way. The Shenton one, and I've never quite gotten to the bottom of that, is whether, I think the area that you're including, I actually consider the Northfield industrial area. But my understanding is in that the way that it was written in the original OCP, it actually probably is the Shenton/Northfield area, and those land uses would be accommodated in those areas. Currently, right now, some of the other locations or some of the areas that we're looking at as corridor designation would be in car sales areas, and that would be the places that we would see more likely a shift. And so when those land uses changed hands, if they're moving from moving in forward as a corridor designation, that's where it would be less supported, and really trying to focus our car dealerships within the light industrial designation.
And I guess perhaps one assurance I might add, and Councillor Turley, this is around your concern around grandfathering. Yes, if there's an existing use that is existing at the time that the new OCP is adopted, they wouldn't be made to stop that use. I don't know if that helps.
So basically then, if somebody purchases a property and did not wish to continue a dealership there, then they wouldn't at a later date want to go back to having auto sales. And I'm thinking mainly of Wellington Road and Mostar, where there's at least three dealerships in that area, and a number of auto-related industries, trailers and repair shops, that type of thing. And I don't see the Wellington and the Mostar being included in any of the, I assumed it was in the Boban area, but I'm just being advised it's not. So if the dealership changes hands, but remains as a dealership, then there's no issue. It's where they decide to either move or sell the property or sell the property to somebody who doesn't want to use it as a dealership.
Lisa, can I jump in here for a
sure,
second?
Absolutely.
Yeah, and through the chair, Councillor Turley, I think this is a really important point, and I've heard it a couple times now, and we just need to remember that what we're talking about now through Reimagine and ultimately the city plan is our policy document, and amending our long-range official community plan policy designations for property. Separate from that would continue to be our zoning bylaw. So even if tomorrow council adopted a new OCP that took us in a new direction on pick any topic, any issue, the zoning bylaw continues to be there. And it's through the changing of the zoning bylaw that the legislation actually gives this protection of legal non-conforming use. There's kind of, I guess you can think of it as a couple of hurdles. The first question is, do you want to change the OCP and what's the policy you put in place? And then secondly, are we going to then follow that up immediately with changing our zoning bylaw? And if we do, how does it impact these uses that you're talking about? And it's at that point you'd be talking about, well, are we making existing businesses legal non-conforming? And as long as that business continues to operate, even if we change the zoning, they're protected under legal non-conforming status. They can change, the property can change hands as long as that the land and buildings continues to be put to the same use. So I just want to be careful when we're talking about what some people would define as grandfather and grandparenting. It's really at the zoning bylaw stage, not as much at the OCP policy level.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Brown.
Sorry, Chair. I couldn't find my microphone. Yeah, and I can't see anything other than the full screen. But there we go. So Lisa touched upon, I think it was Lisa, the sort of, the changing business models, in particular around car dealerships. But I've seen some pretty two innovative concepts that were explored for Nanaimo at a higher level, but they've been implemented elsewhere, and it's sort of the changing styles of industrial park. How we've sort of have tend to put industrial as a standalone use, on the edge of town or in very specific areas, and how there's a lot of examples of lighter styles, even medium style industrial being incorporated into, what we would more normally think as commercial or mixed use areas. And I'm just wondering, did we look at that through these land use inventories about how, due to sort of technical improvements and on-site planning, that industrial could be incorporated into areas that we have more normally associated with commercial? So, for example, just something as crazy as, like, could certain levels of industrial activity actually be incorporated in downtown, along the Terminal Trench, where they provide jobs, they provide a style of building that you wouldn't even know it's different from commercial use. So that's just sort of my question: as we've looked to industrial planning, have we looked at where some of those technical improvements might have opened up opportunities that we wouldn't have normally looked at?
Okay, I'm going to see, Jana, what your thoughts are on this one. In terms of those models, I mean, one of the big things that we're trying to do is, yes, both have a vibrant community in terms of different land uses, and also look at things that minimize conflict. And I would say that there are some uses that may qualify as commercial but not industrial because they don't have the impacts. And I think that's what you're suggesting, where they could be integrated into residential areas without noise, smells, smoke, and so forth. And so there's that kind of distinction between what I'd call almost heavy commercial or tech type things that don't have those typical industrial impacts. And I know that, Jana, at one point we had looked at, that kind of Ladysmith model that we've seen with integrating live, work, and residential with industrial, and played around a bit with that. I don't know if you've got any thoughts you'd like to add.
I have lots of thoughts on that particular topic, but I'll try to manage them. I always think breweries are a very good example of this, and we actually have them both in industrial land uses as well as in our mixed use areas. And so I think that we do want to make sure that we're putting in policy and supportive policy into our mixed use and corridor areas that say we're willing to entertain this as long as it's compatible with the residential nature of those areas. And so I think that through policy we can help to clarify that and encourage some of those uses to consider being part of our vibrant mixed use areas, because that is essentially what we're trying to achieve. On the industrial land use side of things, and that's where it gets a little bit tricky, it is intentionally meant to blur those lines. Like, we don't have hard and fast, you cannot go here if you're a brewery, you must go somewhere else. It's trying to allow a little bit of flexibility and opportunity for uses to become a little bit more vibrant and interesting. And so on the industrial land use side, one of the things that we're trying to walk very carefully through is the idea of making sure we're preserving our industrial lands, our light industrial lands, for the uses that really most need to be here, knowing that we do have a limited area for that. We're trying to introduce a little bit more policy that maybe discourages some of those marginal uses to find themselves in industrial and make their way into our mixed use centers as part of that approach. And then as part of our industrial, more mixing of uses approach is looking at policy that would support, and the current OCP does this as well, does support a limited amount of live work, or an opportunity to have some of those starter industrial lands or things like that, where people can actually be living on site and supporting things like car repair or something like that, where you actually do need to be in an industrial setting. So I don't know that I've answered that thoroughly, but I think the idea is we're trying to add enough flexibility within our commercial areas as well as in our industrial areas to allow a little bit more mixing than we've seen in the past, and something that we'd be keen to pursue a little bit further, I think.
Yeah, thank you for that.
Yeah, and maybe to build on that quickly, at the same time ensuring that we're not losing valuable industrial land that generates we know a high proportion of taxes and employment to other uses that could be better suited for other areas. So that's been our real kind of focus here, is making sure that based on the land inventory that we're really trying to maximize the market demands that we know we're in some ways actually even currently not meeting in terms of available industrial lands of a certain size. So thank you for that, though, because that's part of what we do have to make sure we consider with the policies.
Thank you. And Councillor Hemmons, you're next.
And thanks for that explanation, Jana. That was actually, I was a little concerned about updating policy to discourage marginal uses, because I think marginal uses are really vibrant communities. Like I think of Boxwood, and I think of, you know, that interplay between educational facilities and light industry. And I think it's a really interesting mix for those neighborhoods. My question specifically is, I just want to make sure I'm understanding the math presented on the slide. So in 2008, we had 585 designated industrial hectares. And in the city plan, we're looking at 661. And does that encap, the Collier's report says that we are going to need another 650. So is that in addition to the 661 that currently exists in city plan? Or does that mean that if we do Ocean View, we don't need the sandstone industrial land?
Okay.
That's a bit cheeky, Dad.
Yeah. To respond to that is, it's not an additional. That's what the land inventory is saying. This is what we need. And so what we've got here for the designated industrial lands, by including the addition of sandstone, Ocean View, I beg your pardon, that gives us enough to meet the prescribed demand. Now that 650 is a mid-range. Their higher upper limit was, I think, closer to 727. And one of the things that Kirsty McDonald mentioned is that excludes sandstone. So based on the decisions made around sandstone, there's an additional approximately 100 hectares on top of that. So potentially that takes us to 761. And that gets us very close, actually a little bit over what Collier's currently is predicting that we need to keep pace with demand. Jana and team, do you concur with me on that?
Yes, I think you summarized it perfectly, Lisa. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Any further questions? If not, I do have a couple myself. I'm quite interested in the industrial as well. I live quite close to Boxwood and Shenton areas, both within a 15-minute walk. And our concept of having 15-minute walkable neighborhoods requires that people be able to walk to work. So industrial land should be also within 15 minutes of where you are, as opposed to parking them out at the outskirts of the city where you have to drive to see them. So I'm wondering, and I don't want to throw a spanner in the works here, but have we ever approached the concept of linear nodes as opposed to dot nodes, so that Bowen itself, through the corridor designation, becomes the city center, so to speak? Not like I'm talking downtown, but to me, that would be ideal, because I sit in this spot where I am at here. I can walk 15 minutes to a grocery store in one direction. I can walk 15 minutes to a grocery store in the other direction. If more people lived on this corridor, we'd already be within that 15-minute designation. So to me, the idea of putting dots on a map and then growing out from the dot makes less sense than putting everybody on a major artery and growing out from the artery. Now, I know that's not even on any of these pictures, and I apologize for that, but I unfortunately had a talk with the planner, and he kind of convinced me about this concept, also about the idea of keeping buildings below 12 stories, so as well. So that's my question, is that something we ever considered, and would we be incorporating that in the core designation zoning so that we could have industrial and commercial? Because I look at the ones on Boxwood, and that is the best neighbors in the world, because they're all closed at 5. And there's nobody down there. You can walk down there. You got no neighbors. That the whole concept. And I just think that those sporadically put throughout the city would just be fine. Mind you, maybe other people I know I think that, right? But if we go with that route, then we can actually designate other areas as industrial, even though they're not industrial now, and increase our industrial base going forward. So I'm done talking. Go ahead. Anything?
Well, that's a really interesting concept. I'm going to just throw this out there and see what Mr. Lindsay and others think. I would hazard that Nanaimo was almost built as a linear node, as an experiment sort of post-amalgamation. And what we saw, particularly along the Island Highway, the old Island Highway, was the evolution of all these commercial centers, whether it was Terminal Park, Brooks Landing, and a whole string of pockets. And one of the things that we've seen, and I would argue a little bit, I guess, that the corridor designation in a way is a form of a linear node. But what we found is what's happened is that we're not getting those critical masses of commercial or pockets that really support transit. And so we've reduced some of those corridor areas in favor of more residential to try and support the nodes. I think part of our challenge, Council Mona, is that we've inherited a very challenging linear coastal community that over time, we used to have this compact downtown, almost like what you see as our primary urban center and then our neighborhood center. And then we fanned out as we amalgamated and each center went along. It's a really interesting concept. It's not one I recall coming up in our public comments during phase 1 and 2, but I'm going to ask the team if that's anything that they recall coming up with. It's a really interesting concept. And we are fairly far down the road with what we've got. I don't know if Mr. Lindsay or anybody else has any thoughts. I mean, it's really interesting. I'm just not sure how we reconcile it, given that with our current status. And ultimately, what we're doing is we're really tweaking what we think has been shown to work with 2008, which is keeping the corridors to link those centers, which I think builds on your very point about that kind of linear node. I'll let somebody else share their thoughts.
Saw Mr. Lindsay's smiling there earlier.
Thank you, Chair. And I think what I would add is, I mean, Nanaimo is somewhat uniquely positioned, right? Because we are this, multiple areas that came together in the 70s. So as a result, we have each of those came with small pockets of industrial. So Nanaimo has like these unique small pockets of industrial spread throughout it. And I think for a long time, we've often seen that as a challenge, and how do you separate these uses and screen these uses? But I think it's more recently trended to much of what you're talking about, is the vibrancy of those spaces and what they offer to surrounding neighborhoods done right is actually a benefit. So I see the plan actually building on that myself. The other is your discussion about the corridors and the role corridors play. I think that's been a challenge that this community's had, since I've been here, is how do you get the appropriate amount of development on a corridor and still make sure the town centers develop in a way that are timely. But this plan, the plan we're, at least model that we're thinking sharing with the community, certainly talks about more people living on corridors that would be within walking distance of existing services, that would be on these ideally high transit corridors that would allow connection, either walking or public transit to these spaces. So I don't think it's necessarily as much a rethink to the plan, or it's just reemphasizing those things that you're talking about, the benefits that this plan does allow for many of those things.
Thank you. And Your Worship, you're next. Can you hit very fast on the mute button?
Thank you very much, Chair. And to some extent, I agree with the issue you've raised. But I think Ms. Bopal Singh and Mr. Lindsay have explained this fairly well. And I'm going to pull the old man thing out of an orifice, if I may, today. Although I was born in the city, I was raised in Coons, I've been coming to the downtown of beautiful Nanaimo in my own memory for over 60 years. And I have watched this community and how it's developed. I've seen those neighborhood stores and little commercial centers disappear. And if you wander out, I think it's on 3rd, you can recognize a house that was a store. I can remember when there's a big grocery store at Town Site, just a kitty corner to Brecken School, and people shop there. people made choices with the availability of the automobile, and we essentially destroyed these lovely little nodes that to some extent already existed in terms of people being able to walk to get services. We're trying to recreate it. And I think in fairness, your pitch for what I think that planner referred to as a high street, because I'm sure we're all thinking about the same conversation and the same presentation, which I give staff credit for bringing to us, by the way, points out that we're probably doing as well as we possibly can in a time when people are still wed to their automobiles. I mean, don't tell me it's convenient to drive all the way from the south end to Costco, but people want to go there, and they don't go there on buses, they go there in cars. And so I think what's really being proposed here recognizes those corridors within reason, is trying to develop nodes along them, and those nodes will eventually fill in over time and will be fairly repetitive. But I appreciate what you're suggesting, Chair, but I honestly think that Mr. Lindsay and Ms. Bopel-Singh have really given us the right answers. This is the logical approach to what we have, taking into account the driving and living patterns of people. You can guide, but you cannot force. And right now, I think the general community support for the concept of nodes, and they are stretched out along busy corridors, is probably the best we can hope for in the time. So mark me down as a supporter, but appreciative very much, I think, of what the chair is throwing out there. I won't call it a spanner, though, but it's provocative.
Thank you, Your Worship. And Councillor Brown, go ahead.
I'll keep it short, Chair, but I don't know the planner that you spoke to, but I've seen such theories presented before, and I have a suspicion who it is. And I would just comment that I think that that particular ideology looks great on paper, but in practice, it does not account for the intricacies of human life and how people travel, and the vast difference and diversity in which people walk and navigate their city, and the type of uses and things that they want to see. And I think that diversity can only be achieved in a more compact node that exceeds what is possible through lines on the paper. So I very much agree with Ms. Bopel-Singh's answer.
Anything else, Your Worship? Hand still up. Okay. I think if I look at, we're at 3:03. So we're scheduled for a 15-minute break here. Should we come back at, let's say, well, let's go with 3:15 and get us back on track. Ms. Bopel-Singh?
Before we wrap up on industrial lands, could I just ask, with maybe a show of hands, if you're comfortable with us going out to the public with what we've got based on our discussion and explanation? That would just really help us to...
Thumbs up.
Okay, thank you so much. Okay, and through the chair and Ms. Gurry, are we okay to continue after the break on this, or do you want us to pause and you go on to your other agenda items and we'll look at a future GPC? Well, what's the direction here?
I'm not sure if Mr. Rudolph is on here, but I think we could probably come back and maybe extend this to 3:30 and see what 15 more minutes could get you. And then besides the update that is kind of important that we do today, we could probably defer the other matters that are on the agenda and have a quick conversation about the ABICC resolutions. But I think that we can definitely come back with at least 15 more minutes of reimagine.
Okay.
Thank you so much.
All right, so we'll see everybody back here at 3:15. Great, thank you.
see a few. So,
Oh, there are.
Chair, I think that if you
with me, we can make all the big decisions when the mayor is gone.
Okay, so through the chair to the rest of council, given that we had quite a few comments quite early up front that we put off on building heights, we'd like to suggest that we jump to building heights and then go back to the other land use designations, because the building height conversation might help answer some of the questions that you have related to the land use designations. So if you're okay with that, then we'll proceed like that, and I will turn over to Kasia. I'm just going to get us lined up in our slides here. Does that work for you, Chair?
Yes, it works for me. Mm-hmm.
Perfect.
We're almost there.
We're almost there. And then at the end, we'll talk to you about how much we can get through and what we can bump to another. So over to Kasia for looking at building heights. Am I on the right one here, Kasia?
You're right. So this is linked to a discussion with prioritization of urban centers and building heights. So the two are together. So in relation to the current OCP, it currently doesn't provide any specific guidance on the prioritization of growth of the urban centers. So what we were discussing previously. In regards to building heights, high-rise is supported equally in all urban nodes and commercial centers right now. So the two emerging directions are to include written policy outlining a hierarchy for city investment in urban centers. This approach would align with our other strategic plans. And second emerging direction is to support 12 plus stories in one of the primary urban centers, which is the downtown, and to support up to 12 stories with limited potential for additional heights in the 6 secondary urban centers. So the policy would recognize growth in areas with infrastructure capacity restrictions. The policy would recognize that areas with infrastructure capacity restrictions would not proceed until funding and a plan to address is in place. Next slide, please. So in more detail now in relation to the primary urban center, the emerging approach is for it to be support up or 12 plus stories. The heights would be guided by the Nanaimo Downtown Plan, which is the image you see right there, as well as the Nanaimo Downtown Design Plan. So currently the Downtown Plan has established a high-rise zone as shown in this illustration. So the areas in pink are currently allowing buildings above 12 stories. And these are specifically located to preserve public views. Notwithstanding this plan, the current zoning bylaw permits additional heights for key sites that are beyond. Some of them fall within the pink areas and some are beyond the pink areas. And of those, there are only a few remaining vacant sites on Front Street and Terminal Avenue. The remaining lands would generally be limited to 6 stories. Next slide, please. The emerging direction to the secondary urban centers would be to support up to 12 stories with the flexibility to support increased heights under key circumstances or as determined through an area planning process. This direction is to limit heights, and the prioritization of urban centers is to realize the complete communities that were envisioned. With 7 urban centers, there is the risk that we get a little bit everywhere, but not the critical mass needed to achieve the complete communities, which is what we discussed previously. The emerging directions are exploring how we can encourage growth to happen more quickly in these key areas. So one, we can do that by limiting heights, and the second by including policy that directs city resources and investment in a prioritized fashion, including undertaking city-led area plans and focusing investment in utilities, mobility, and public amenities following these priorities. In areas that have existing servicing capacity limitations, growth will not be supported until funding and a planning is in place for upgrading. And this next slide provides you an overview of the residential land use in relation to heights as well as the type of building form. So I'm just going to launch the poll right now, and then we can delve further into this discussion, or we could just avoid the poll and just have an open discussion on this topic. I'll maybe leave that to the chair to decide.
Do we have anybody that wants to say anything, or you just want to poll this one? Councillor Hemmons?
Thanks, Chair. I'm just curious. I'm now following up on Councillor Thorpe's question about having kind of plans in place to go higher in an area outside of the primary urban center.
Cash, I'm wondering if it's helpful. I think I personally find this graphic, thank you, Jana and Lanark team, for providing it, that shows the transition idea. So with the primary downtown being 12 plus stories, and then showing graphically how it sort of steps down based on the other land uses. I think the question I'm hearing, I think Councillor Martman also spoke to this around Green Thumb, was, is this asterisk here, the potential for additional stories under select circumstances. And some of those also include areas that are pre-approved by other planning processes, including, as Councillor Martman pointed out, the more than 6 stories for the, I believe it was the Green Thumb node you were referring to?
Or
is it Green Thumb?
Councillor Martman, did you have something you want to say?
Sorry. Yes, or to the TELUS building, I believe that was going to be outside of the neighborhood plan. Or there are these urban nodes where we're already going and going to higher stories than what's in the plan. So I find it, why are we creating this plan that is saying 12 stories, up to 12 stories, if we already know we're going to go 16 or 18 in a lot of these urban nodes? Why don't we just increase it to 18 or 24?
I'm wondering, with the TELUS one, I'm just trying to think of that specific example and where that falls in. I think it falls within
the primary urban center.
Yeah, so that one actually is consistent with what we've got here, and also is also consistent, I believe, with the current OCP as well, right? And Mr. Lindsay, perhaps you could help me out a little bit on that particular example along Wallace Street. This is the Wallace Street one? Yeah.
That's correct. So it would generally be in compliance of directionally where we see this plan going. But I'd also want to circle back on Green Thumb and say the same thing. So Green Thumb, the plan that's in front of council, that's scheduled to go to public hearing next month, I guess it is now, talks about the majority of the site actually being 6 stories. And then it talks about a small portion of the site being higher than 6 stories. So it doesn't have a maximum under there. This plan, if it was adopted over top of that, would sort of set your maximum at 12. But again, policy yet to be developed. So there may be specific situations where you want to, I don't know, a landmark building or something that's significant that's responding to a site or topography that might be higher than that height. But council again could consider that through the rezoning of the property. But I would not say that the Green Thumb plan that's proposed is significantly out of line. In fact, I'd say it's in keeping with what you're seeing here today.
Thank you. Councillor Thorpe.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, and through you, my question referenced Green Thumb, and my question has been answered, or my confusion has been clarified. Thank you. Because if we're talking primary urban centers, we're talking potentially 12 or higher, but I see now that secondary urban centers under this would still be up to 12. So it could be over the 8 or 9 that we were sort of debating about Green Thumb site. So that clarifies that for me. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Do we have any other questions? Yeah, none. I think we could probably move on.
Okay, thank you. So we have your, go ahead.
Oh, Councillor Tyler Brown.
Yes, I'm just wondering, I guess my question is why why up to 12 stories? Why was that number chosen for the secondary urban centers?
Well, a couple reasons related to, I think, both the market and then the type of building form that would again concentrate densities in the primary. But you will notice that there is an asterisk at the end that says potential for additional stories in select circumstances. And that's what Mr. Lindsay was speaking to, where there might be opportunities, particularly in transition areas or other areas where council could consider something higher. But overall, and I'm wondering if the rest of the team on the building heights want to jump in, that what we were looking for there is a couple things in terms of the characteristics of focusing on the downtown and that primary center. And one of the things around the dilution and trying to really have that focus there. And then also with this, in terms of density related to building form. And then the other piece is around, now, somebody correct me if I'm wrong, with building form and the changes with the wood frame building, was that going up to 8 or was it going up to 12 instead of concrete? And forgive my ignorance, I'm gapping a little bit. I've been away a couple of weeks, but there was some consideration on that. Jana, or?
I'll do my best.
Maybe 8, but I'm not 100% sure.
Okay.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Jana.
And right now, I think what we're trying to do is set ourselves up for the future to support some of the changes to the BC Building Code that we don't actually know are going to come our way. So 12 seems to be a pretty common height that a lot of communities are aiming for to allow that flexibility into the future. Depending on and thinking about how much density we want to support in areas, we could go up or down. I know we've heard a couple of times that 12 might not be the ideal market for our markets currently as they exist today. And so one of the opportunities we have in phase 3 engagement is to re-engage with the development community and learn more about what does that mean in terms of height. Are we in an area that would support, our developers looking to go to 12 stories, and we know we can't predict what's exactly going to happen to the building code, but we want to build in some flexibility because this is a 25-year plan to support some of those changes that could come our way.
Yeah, and I think Jana, the term is mass wood construction, that technique that is evolving.
Okay, thank you. Just because I understand that feedback is welcome. I know just one person, but I'm pretty strongly against anything above 6 outside the downtown core. And I just don't think it makes a lot of sense for a variety of reasons, and I won't get into here, but it would be I'm just going to say it's pretty hard to convince me off of that position. So just expressing myself because I was informed that the honest and open feedback was absolutely welcome at the session. So thank you.
Well, I guess through the chair, that's a good discussion to have amongst council, right? We're test running this, or we're hoping to test run this or a version of this with the community. So if this is something that council would like to see, what Councillor Brown is proposing, it would be really good to have your guidance and direction on that.
Thank you. Councillor Gusselbach, next.
Yeah, I 100% feel the same way. I don't see the need to go that high, and I haven't really come across a lot saying that it's a good idea anywhere else. So I don't know if it's necessary that we include that 12-story outside of the downtown and just keep it at 6. Or reduce it down to 6, if that's what the past the policy was.
Thank you for your input. I think we're moving on.
I think what would be helpful to know is if we're going out to the community with these proposed building heights related to the different land use designations, is this something like, is council comfortable with what we've got? We've had other input from other council members. How would you like to see us proceed? Are we good test running this? Do we want tweaks based on what Councillors Brown and Gesselbach and others are saying?
Well, I've seen a whole bunch of hands pop up, so I'll start with Councillor Martman.
If I can, okay. for myself, I'd like to hear what the public input is. So I'd like to know whether they would like to see it maxed out at 6 or given that option of up to 12 stories. So I'm looking for public feedback on it.
Thank you. And Councillor Thorpe?
Do we want?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I agree with Councillor Martman. And while personally I might agree with Councillor Brown's position, I also want to hear what the public says. Thanks.
Thank you. Councillor Hemmons?
Councillor Thorpe there. I agree with Councillor Brown. I like the feel of a 6-story and nothing higher, but I think that we should go out to the public with this. So I'm happy to go ahead. Thank you.
Councillor Turley?
Thank you, Chair. This is a bit of a shock as a person who's deathly afraid of heights, but I don't really see the reason to limit it to 6. The only issue that I could see might be an issue is whether the firefighting equipment we have can go to 12 stories or not. That might sway me the other way. However, I think we should leave it up to the market and the public as to how high the building should or should not be. Yeah, I don't think we should be mandating it. Thank you.
Councillor Gesselbrad, you have your hand up. Are you good?
Yeah, I've got a comment on that. I guess, like, I mean, when we say hear the public's feedback on it, it's just like, what do we think is the right thing to do, and then ask for feedback on it. You know, we're going to be like, my understanding is like we go out with something and receive feedback on it. So we either go out with like, yep, on the zoning we don't go above 6 feet, and then if it 6 stories, and then the public can be like, well, we actually think we should have it go higher, or we go out with them and say we're going to allow 12 feet, and then the public will be like, well, we don't want it to go above 12 feet, but they, you know, depending on what people might not pick up on it or not, but we got to provide the initial offering. And so if the majority on council actually is like, well, you know, we don't think, and we do represent, you know, our constituents, that 12 stories is a good idea in non-urban thing. Let's put that out and then see what the public says. I mean, if people really want to have 12 stories outside of the downtown, they'll let us know. So my personal preference would be to just put that we don't have, you know, the max height is 6 stories in the secondary urban nodes, and then if people feel otherwise, they'll let us know.
Thank you, Your Worship. You're muted, sir.
Me, sorry. I don't want to feel like I'm pouncing on Councillor Brown by any stretch, but my view is if you put out something which may attract controversy, even from councillors now and or the members of the public, it will probably generate the kind of interest and feedback that's necessary for us to make the ultimate decision, which will fall to us. So I say put it out there and see what the response is.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Hammonds, you want another kick of the can? Mr. Turley, you're good too?
No.
Okay, go ahead. Okay. Councillor Gusselbach, you got your hand up still.
It's stuck up there.
Okay, we'll just count you off as a thing. Ms. Volpelsing.
Okay, one thing that Jana Zielinski has pointed out is that we can address this specifically in how we ask the questions. And there will be implications for how we play with where 40,000 people get accommodated. So it's a bit of a balancing act, right? Because we can run out of land very quickly depending on building form and where. So I think we can ask the question, and then part of the responses we get is we have to come back to council and say, okay, if we go with 6 stories in the secondary centers, this is what it means potentially for other building forms that we need to get, or we need to accommodate more density in the primary in order to do that. So I think we can address this nicely in the way we ask the questions so that people understand the implications, and then also that it's not that it can be less. I do also want to point out that there are circumstances where, as we showed you, there are areas that are actually zoned, and there's no current consideration of what I would say down zoning that at this time. in a few spot areas. So I think you recall the map that I showed. So
I was just gonna,
I think we can,
if I may.
Sure.
Lisa, if you don't mind.
Here, I think it's this one. Oh no, this is in the downtown core. Did we have one that was outside?
No, we don't have
okay.
one. I was just going to clarify that this downtown plan, except for the areas that are shown in pink in the zoning that I mentioned that have, current zoning rights, the majority of this area actually permits up to 6 stories. And that is guided by the downtown design plan, which much of it has yet to be implemented. So that was part of the decision around the building heights for the downtown primary center.
And I have Councillor Gesselbach and then Councillor Turley.
Yeah, that's my question. Is that, I guess one comment is that, allowing 12 stories in other areas, it's that tube of toothpaste, right? It's just going to be spread out. Whereas do we want to concentrate our density into the downtown? And I understand we got to make the calculation on, how are we going to meet the amount of units that we're going to foresee with population. But I think this is one of those determinants, is that, are we going to just spread everything out and kind of have things half done, or get it done properly in one location? The other is just in terms of, say if we allow 12-story buildings in other locations, is it for that entire area that's designed as a node, or does then you have to apply for specific zoning amendment to get that change? Or do we pre-zone areas, be like, well, this is not going to affect views or light penetration, and we'll allow 12 stories in these spots? Or does the developer then come and say, well, in this entire area, we've said that it's okay for 12 stories, and then we're going to apply for this specific property?
I think through the chair, I'll have a stab at this, and I may hand over to Deputy Lindsay here. One of the things that you may have recalled that we mentioned was doing area plans for these nodes. And so we already have one for the hostel. So that actually provides us with that definition of building heights, and that was done. And so we have opportunities with Woodgrove and then I'm North to do exactly what you're saying, Councillor Gesselbach, to define within those urban centers where would be appropriate. So for example, we have Woodgrove Mall. That is a place where you could go above 6 stories potentially, and make use of that vast asphalt area, a better use of that site without impeding views against a corridor. But again, it comes down to timing. And I think that's kind of one of the things that you and I think Councillor Brown are concerned about, is if you want a critical mass here first, how do you facilitate that? But can you also have some of that density in the north end, which is a transit hub and other anchor points? So there's the opportunity, I think, through the area plans to define specific areas where that's suitable within those centers versus a mass anywhere in the urban center. I think that's the intention here. And Jana, Dale, others, please jump in if you think I'm incorrect there.
I think they're going to leave you hanging.
I was just going to say that I believe Jana is working on policy around the step down. If you are adjacent to a core neighborhood, that there would be that natural step down. So the higher density would be closer to the transit hub, and then it would step down, supported by policy.
That's right. I mean, what we were trying to do with this building height, and maybe I'll go back to this, is have that sympathetic piece, so that if you're against a neighborhood and that neighborhood's coming up against a primary center, either the downtown or the secondary or a corridor, that there is a look at the way the building form works. And part of that is height and allowing for those transitions. And that's what Jan's helping us work out on. So any other thoughts, team?
Lisa, can we just speak to Council Gesselbach's question about zoning? I think that's an important point. And I think, and maybe I'll just provide a comment, you can jump in, but because I think that is a future decision point for council. It's either going to be an action item in this plan, but there's about 3 different scenarios I can think of off the top of my head. It's one is you adopt the policy document, and then we wait for people to come forward and make zoning applications, and we would use this as a policy document to evaluate those applications. The next is you could just come in and say, well, we immediately want to do amendments to our zoning bylaw to bring them in to be consistent with the policy document. I suspect there's probably a place in the middle, and Lisa started to speak to it where she talked about the need to do town center structure plans. I think through that town center structure, those structure plans, you're going to be able to refine these town centers a little bit better, which would then allow you to apply zoning. So if you think about the downtown, that's the process we went through downtown. And in the downtown, there's areas, as we've shown you here today, that allow for high rise. But equally and as important, I would say, is there's areas that we've said you can't be more than 2 stories in height because we want to maintain the flavor of Commercial Street. There's something unique about that spot that we don't want high rises right on Commercial. We don't even want 6-story buildings. But there's other areas in the downtown because of topography and public view corridors, servicing, all these other reasons that lend themselves to higher buildings. So I think those individual structural plans will become very important and then would lead council to the subsequent decision about zoning in the future.
Thank you. I have Councillor Turley and then Councillor Brown.
Thank you, Chair. I have a comment now, not a question. I think it's very important to remember that for these nodes to be successful at attracting capital, i.e. development, we need to provide the ability to have a more dense population for the success of the businesses that choose to set up there. Because I think if you find that it's not really a great dense location, as are the Save-Ons and Fairway Markets, et cetera, of the world, are they going to go and choose to set up a grocery store there if the population doesn't warrant it? Because believe me, they do their homework to be able to determine where they set up. And then, of course, if you lose a lot of the attractive businesses that are necessary in that area, now you've got people going back to using the car because they got to drive somewhere to get their groceries or whatever the product is they're looking for. So that has to be part of the mix of the decision-making process that we have to be involved in, is how to make sure that businesses that choose to be there are successful. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Turley and Councillor Brown.
Thanks, Chair. I really think there's a lot of wisdom in what Councillor Gesselbrock is bringing up here, and I think these plans, like it doesn't make sense to develop a plan where you're like, well, yeah, great, we're going to have 6 nodes that are viable in 50 years. I really think there needs to be a lot of effort and thought and put in is how do you maximize your potential for how do you triage what you have existing to create viable nodes and then build out from there? And that's my great fear with some of these, I would say, and I'm just projecting my thoughts. I'm not suggesting that's where we're going to end up, but my great fear is we're going to when we put things out to the public because we say, hey, we want to hear from them. We're paying consultants, we're paying staff, and we have to put out something that's not just pie in the sky. What do you want? That's the job. The job is to refine that. And I agree with Councillor Turley. A large component of that is what is the viability from a private sector capital investment, and there's a lot of calculus that has to go into that. And so I just put that, we can go to the public and all that sort of thing, but I don't know how many plans I've looked at that have lots of great things, but they're just never implemented. And because they employ that strategy around, let's put it out to the public, hey, you get all this feedback, and then you get this Frankenstein plan that really doesn't make a whole lot of sense. It doesn't deliver on what it's supposed to deliver on. That's all. So, when you look 40,000 folks, viability of the market, the cost of the land, even if you project that out, I would need to really see some hard numbers and analysis that says, yeah, it supports a use case for a primary urban center with that many secondary urban centers that can see that type of story development in a way that makes sense and produces viable nodes. Just a big concern for me and a potential red flag, but it may be perfectly backed up, but I just haven't seen that information to feel confident that you're putting something out to the public that makes sense. Thanks.
In order, for the interest of time, I think we have 2 issues here, or we have to make a decision on one issue. And I think that is, do we limit secondary urban center to 12 stories and send it out to the public and wait for them to tell us that's too low? Or do we set it at 12 stories and send it out to the public and wait for them to tell us that's too high? Am I summing that up fairly well? Councillor Gesselbach, put your hand up.
Yeah, I'd be happy to just, put a motion for a recommendation on the table, and then we can vote on it just to sort of see where everybody's at. But I would move that we limit the secondary urban centers to 6 stories.
Okay, we have a motion and a seconder, I'm guessing, by Councillor Brown. And if the event that this thing doesn't pass, then it goes out as it is, as we see it in front of us. Is that good? Okay, so everybody's had a chance to, whoops, there we go. Councillor Thorpe and Councillor Hemmons. Councillor Thorpe, could you just please unmute yourself? Thanks.
Sorry, I was too eager to unmute there. No, I won't support this, and this goes to the concern I raised earlier. Here we are wanting to predetermine a result. Reimagine Nanaimo, asking the input of our citizens what they want to see our city look like in 25 or 50 years. And now we're about to predetermine that. No, I'm sorry, whether I agree or not, I think we put this out as it is. Then if we get a certain response, we can debate whether we want to support that or not. And again, as I said before, that becomes a political decision at the time. But by all means, let's hear what the public has to say first. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Hemmons.
Could I ask for staff comment on the implications of potentially reducing those heights in the secondary urban centers and whether we would be able to meet the needs, the housing needs of those we're expecting to come to the city?
Ms. Polkelsing, there we go.
I did the same thing. So Jan, I'm going to call on you in a minute. However, what I would say, yes, it does have implications because the calculations for the distribution of future populations is based on a certain proportion of building form that allows for higher density in the form of a high-rise. However, there are other ways of addressing it and distributing it. And I think we need to look at what we're having Colliers do right now in terms of if that were to shift significantly. And there's a couple in betweens. Are there some urban centers where secondary centers where it is supportable, or is it a blanket? No. And there's also too, for the way we frame things for the community, is to ask for their feedback so that they're aware of the pros and cons with the different height implications in terms of accommodating future units for future residential. Jan, I don't know if you've got anything else to add.
I would just will add one tricky nuance, and I really like the idea, Lisa, of framing up a little bit more information to the public and talking about the pros and cons of why we might consider 12 stories or 6 stories, and there are pros and cons to each approach, and giving them that information as part of their decision making about it, I think, can be really helpful. I think one of the interesting things is building form is tied to density, but it's not a full predictor of density. You can have very dense 6-story buildings and less dense 12-story buildings. And so there's sometimes a little bit of a trade-off as we can still likely achieve the density targets that we're trying to achieve in those areas, but it's going to look a little bit different on the ground in terms of what that space looks like. So there is a nuance, and it can make a difference, but it's sometimes not quite as much as we think it is when it comes to actually achieving the numbers that we want in those centers.
Yeah, and Jan, if I could build on that, the interesting thing, and I know we don't have the graphics right here, is that for some of us who, been in other urban centers, there are times where a building well designed can actually be 6 stories but feel like 2, be 8 stories but feel like 4, all based on good design and massing. And the interesting thing to think about with this city plan is it's not supposed to be as detailed as a zoning bylaw and as specific. It's meant to provide flexibility for those nuances where there are transition areas and where there are opportunities. And so you may have something that is sitting in a big gully where it could accommodate a few extra stories and keep the feel of a neighborhood and what we're trying to achieve, or in another area where you want to look at a different building form en masse. I don't know if I'm doing a great job of explaining that, and I'm trying to rack my brains for a few examples. And I think, Jan, I'm just building on the nuances that you're speaking, and it's how do we create that sensitivity in this overall document that's not as defined as a specific either zoning or even an area plan. And I do agree with Mr. Lindsay that an area plan or a structure plan does give the opportunity to have that approach define and look more detailed at specific areas. But I do think that we have an opportunity to meet what Councillor Gaspard and Councillor Brown are talking about by framing it to the public with our questions. Like, we're suggesting this, but also saying, there's opportunities for 8 or 6. Here are some other considerations, and framing up the questions in such a way that the community really can understand. And I think, Jana, that comes back to some of the visuals and examples that we've done in terms of conveying that to the community. I don't know, any other thoughts, Mr. Lindsay?
I think I'm trying to be, reflective of the fact that we have a motion on the table right now and want council to deal with that. So I'm trying not to steer the discussion, but maybe we'll let council deal with that. And
absolutely. Sorry.
We can circle back.
Okay. We have one more quick comment from Councillor.
Really quick, I think regardless of the outcome of the vote on this motion, I think presenting what you described there, Lisa, would be excellent. Thank you.
Okay, so we have a motion on the table. I'm going to call the question, and that is to reduce these secondary urban centers to a maximum of 6 stories. All those in favor? I see Councillor Gusselbrock, Councillor Hemmons, and Councillor Brown in favor. All those opposed? I see 4 opposed. The other 4 is opposed. The motion fails. So moving along. Next item.
Okay, so I think with that, we will take those concerns into consideration with how we present to the public, and I think that's been really, really helpful feedback for us. It's actually quite a relief to be able to just get some feedback on this. So with that, I think we're all comfortable moving ahead with the approach we have with building heights and us being very careful as staff and how we communicate that when we come to the public to ask for feedback. And with that, we have 2 choices. How am I doing for time, Councillor Bonner, in terms of?
Have about another 7 or so minutes.
Okay, so we have an opportunity to go back to a couple of the land use designations that up to 3 people had concerns about the approach, and I think that would probably be the best, most tangible way to go, and we'll see how far we get. And then with the other agenda items we haven't gotten to, we'll talk about next steps. I'll leave maybe a minute for next steps and when we could bring those forward to either the next GPC or look at something in between, given our very aggressive timeline. And so with that, in terms of order of preference, you see the 3s here: neighborhood center, core neighborhood, and then I think we've done industrial land. So we've got, I think I might propose, because there was one person with some big concerns here, that we start with the core neighborhood to find out what that comment or concern was, and hopefully whoever responded here and also with the question mark, you've noted down your comments. Does that sound okay, Councillor Bonner?
Sure. Mm-hmm.
Okay. All right, so if you just bear with me while I get back to that. And so here we have where we explained a shift with taking the neighborhood designation and having what's called core, and you can think of that as a transition area between neighborhoods that come up against corridors and urban centers and having increased infill and density there, and then stepping down to the neighborhood designation. So just wondering if the concerns that were highlighted in the poll, if there's any discussion there with those who we can clarify or respond to.
Did anyone have some concerns about this that they wanted to bring forward now? I think they've changed their mind. Oh, Councillor Thorpe.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I'm not even sure now, but I think it was me that expressed a concern. But that was a personal concern because it does seem a major shift in really how we define neighborhoods. But having said that, in keeping with my earlier comments, I have no problem with putting this forward to the public to see what they think about it. To me, it is a very significant change in definition. And I think it would be concerning to some people, but I'd be interested in hearing what those people have to say. Thanks.
So thank you. With that, are we good to proceed then with this particular one?
I'm not seeing any shaking of heads,
Okay.
so I would say yes.
Okay, awesome. Okay, and then the next one was, Ash and Chris, you might need to help me in terms of where I'm ordering the slides. Neighborhood Center, I think I'm up a little bit. Am I down? Bear with me. So the next one was some concerns around the concept of the neighborhood center. And I'm just, you'll have to excuse me, I don't want to duck out of this to find exactly where it is in another format. Oh, here we go. Here it is right here. Okay, so this was the idea around having smaller commercial centers in our neighborhoods, and looking at up to 2 to 4 stories. So examples of that would be like Departure Bay. We have a couple others. Actually, maybe what would be helpful is for me to actually show you a map of where they are. And the idea of having small amounts of commercial allowed in neighborhoods that are walkable. And I think it would be helpful if I could actually show you where those are. So you see the pink dots on the right hand of this legend here. So you see Departure Bay here, Hammond Bay over here, one close to the South End area, kind of near the corner of Halliburton and Needham and the Nickel Street area, the Harewood Mall area, hospital area, the Waddington little commercial area clinic area, and then what's this one? Help me out. This is Georgia Avenue. That says the one there, the country grocer that's down, that lovely country grocer down in
8th and Bruce.
Thank you. And then this one up here. What did we call this one?
So we called that one Jingle Pot.
We did call this one Jingle Pot, yes. So there were a couple sort of not sures around this. So again, before we go out to the community, if we could understand what those comments are, that would be helpful.
Anybody want to comment? Councillor Gusselbrecht.
Yes, just in terms of the neighborhood center, I guess in the Sandstone application, there was a employment lands type commercial thing. Is that on a larger scale than what we're envisioning here for a neighborhood center, or is that, I just don't see it kind of.
Right. So what we did is, because those, that along with Green Thumb are applications that are in play, we did not have them here, but the idea currently, the plan that is before council for consideration for Sandstone is a bigger commercial center, but still modest. So I'd say somewhere between a neighborhood center and one of our urban centers.
Secondary urban node. Okay,
Yeah,
thanks.
that's right. And feel free if Ms. Rowett or Mr. Lindsay or Mr. Holm disagree with me on that one, please pipe up. But that would be my explanation of that with these particular designations here.
Are there any other questions, or are we okay with sending this out? I think we are.
Okay, wonderful. Okay, so that, other than the other feedback we got from the polls, had maybe just one comment or concern. Is there anything else? Let's see, I'm just going to get to our feedback form that maybe somebody hasn't had a question answered, and we'll quickly deal with that before we just wrap this up. Okay, so low density neighborhood, there was a lot of agreement there. And again, the same with the blue and green lands, but there were a couple of you that had a few questions. So if there's anything key before we go out to the community with what we're proposing, it'd be helpful to know that now.
Councilor Gusselbrecht, did you change your hand? Oh, there you go.
Yeah, just a question on the blue and green lands. Has analysis been done of, like, say, if we're having more focused density around particular urban nodes like Woodgrove or, you know, even in the downtown, if we're building these walkable, you know, nice to live in neighborhoods, the amount of parkland that's accessible and where we need to be potentially targeting parkland development, especially like urban parkland. Yeah, I'm just curious if that analysis has been done. Is that something that we need to be thinking about as areas densify?
So I'm going to actually ask Ms. McDonald to chime in, and she can correct me if I'm wrong on this one. What we see this doing is setting the framework up for prioritizing acquisition based on environmental sensitivity, what we already have, and enhancing it, and opportunities that come up through development in those areas, based on linking it to either population demand. And sometimes the demands of the population for a certain form of parkland isn't necessarily compatible with, as we know, certain forms of park where you're looking to actually protect versus have it as a recreational amenity. Christy, I don't know if you've got any thoughts on that one?
Definitely. So we haven't spent a lot of time today yet, at least, talking about the action plans, but a land acquisition strategy and updating the land acquisition strategy would be a primary action that would follow once Reimagine was adopted. And this blue-green strategy with in respect to open space isn't far off what we currently do in the OCP. It's just that there are some redesignations, but this approach has been done for at least 10 years with respect to the parks and open space and the resource management land. It's just that there's some additions to that, and then in the land use maps, and then in the implementation strategy, which we've been focusing a lot on policy development, but how we're actually achieving this through the action plans. Updating the land acquisition strategy for a number of natural acquisitions, which we've been doing, again, over the last 10 years a lot, but moving forward, as well as acquisitions for different purposes of city-owned land, would be something that would be detailing out much more in our secondary document, which is not adopted by bylaw, but is part of our implementation strategy and action plan for achieving all the Reimagine goals.
Okay, thank you. I think just really simplified, I think it's just like, if we are trying to build a way of living where there's more dense living in apartments, that instead of having the green space in your single family home where you can walk out and chill, that there's green space that's close and accessible to these denser areas like the downtown that you can enjoy and not feel like you're in a cage.
And definitely those policies are very much front and center in our and many of our integrated neighborhood sections in our urban node policies. And then also there's, because we're integrating the Parks, Recreation and Culture Master Plan now into City Plan, there's a number of detailed policies about park acquisition and park access within a 5-minute walk. Also, the psychological benefits of parks and open spaces at the immediate residential neighborhood level, actually at all scales throughout the city. So those policies we didn't get into today, but they'll be something that maybe at the next GPC, and then definitely when phase 3 launches with the public and there's a tangible plan for you to look at, they'll be very much detailed at all scales.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Christy. That's perfect. And maybe that will, unless there's anything else, we can move to actually what we're looking at doing next. Is there anything else on our approach with land use at this point that is a burning concern?
Not seeing any other hands,
Okay.
other than Councillor Gusselbrock's stuck hand. So I think we're free to move on. There
Perfect. So what I'm going to propose, in the interest of your time, we're really grateful that you've given us the extra time today, is that we will, you'll see the topic large format retail, integrated neighborhood plans. We'll look at bumping that to the next GPC so that we don't go over time and you have a chance to go through your other agenda items. Of course, if you want to toss them and just focus on us, we'd be thrilled. But so what I'm going to show you is our next steps. So right now we're here with GPC on the 10th. On the 28th, we have topics for you to consider. And I think based on how much we got through today and some things we have to come back and talk to you about, we'll look, right now we were looking originally at having the community well-being aspects of our plan and very much the policies, Councillor Gershbart, that Kirsty was telling you about, how those tie in terms of parks and recreation facilities and how they integrate with this planning process. Was on that, as well as truth and reconciliation, but we do need to make time for a couple more topics we didn't cover today. And I'm actually quite comfortable with how well we've done. And if we can continue a similar format and you're okay with us using Zoom polls as a way to quickly move this through, I think we could get through a fair bit on the 28th. And if we take a look at it after today as staff, we may see if we can do something between the 10th and the 28th with you as a special GPC, because we are really trying to see if we can launch on February 14th and keep with this timeline that you see here with wrapping up phase 3 engagement on the 28th, and then coming back to council with and the commission with the results, making tweaks, and then having a draft that council is comfortable going out to the public with the formal opportunities for engagement. So that's where we're at there. And as I mentioned, we will add some of the topics that we didn't get to today. But I would say, I don't know about you, but I think I share on behalf of the whole team, we're really, really grateful and really pleased that despite us having to pivot and not see you in person, that I think, and actually be good to get your feedback now or later, maybe through Jake, if this format worked for you. Not quite as exciting as being in front of you and having posters around a room, but and hopefully our community members watching were able to follow along fairly well. So with that, on behalf of our team, and just a big thank you to Kirsty and Kasia, who really knocked it out of the park over the Christmas break. A lot of gratitude to them for their work on this today. And of course, Jana, who we hope will get some time off at some point.
Thank you, and I want to let you know that we appreciate the work that staff has done in this, and as well as the consultants. And I think we're well on our way to having a document that will take us into the future, which we planned on many years ago. Thank you very much.
Thank you all.
Now I think we're moving on. Do you have anything else, Ms. Popelsing? Nope, you're nothing. So now we're moving on to item 5B, Governance and Management Excellence, the Association of Vancouver Island and Coastal Communities resolutions. And Ms. Guri, I think, is taking us through that.
Thank you very much, Chair, and thank you, Lisa and team. That was a really interesting session to be a part of. So annually, the Association of Vancouver Island and Coastal Community resolutions are required. The deadline for these ones are January the 18th. Staff did send out an email to council asking if they had any that they wished to bring forward to workshop through today, but we didn't receive any. The report outlines one that had previously been submitted and a motion made by council, by Councillor Armstrong, that is included in the report, and that was to do with staff to engage with the UBCM to engage the province on resolving the issues of how 911 calls can be routed and responded 2 by mental health specialists, whether police or Ministry of Health throughout the province. She since withdrew that request. However, since it was a council motion, it is included in your report. And her reason for withdrawing it is she said that UBCM is already dealing with the matter. So that was Councillor Armstrong's rationale for withdrawing that. That would have gone to AVICC and then through to UBCM. So if any members of the committee have anything that they would like to talk about to go to AVICC, we can do that now. And if not, we will just proceed without the resolutions for this year.
Does anybody have any burning resolutions they need talked about right now? I don't see any.
Perfect. So by matter of this report being on the agenda, you've received it. So I don't need a recommendation and we can just move on.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much.
Don't go away. Moving on brings us up to agenda planning 6A. Carry on. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Chair. So starting on page 19 of your original agenda is the regular agenda planning document where it starts. And page 19 outlines upcoming topics that show the next month's worth of GPC agendas. So today we had AVICC resolutions and we also had Reimagine Nanaimo. And that was a good session, like I had already said. And coming up on the 24th, working around that Reimagine schedule, is a governance update. So this will include the committee review and the update to the committee operating guidelines that was on your list of priorities to go over when we had prioritized your items earlier this year or last year. So going forward, that will be included, as well as some other governance like electronic meetings management and some other matters, just as a refresh this time of your term, just a once a year type thing, a governance refresh. So that'll be scheduled for the 24th, your next governance and priorities committee meeting. February 14th will hopefully be the Reimagine Phase 3 launch. So that'll be a big meeting for you all. And then also that was scheduled, it was a councillor request, 24-hour parking. We will try to flesh that out a little bit and bring you some more information as to when that could be brought forward. On page 20 of your original agenda is topics to be scheduled. A couple of these things need to be cleaned up and removed and or combined together, such as the Schedule D affordable housing and housing affordability. Mr. Lindsay believes that that can be combined into one GPC meeting. So we'll bring that forward to you when that's ready to come. And the street entertainers bylaw, I believe Councillor Turley's the original one that had that on your list of priorities. And he's brought me forward some criteria that he's interested in seeing this looked at before the end of your term. So I will be updating that spreadsheet. And what I was hoping is that this meeting to open the dialogue, but given the time, I think it would be best probably at your next GPC to bring forward some of the topics that you would like to talk about this year. Looking at page 21 of your agenda has the calendar of committee meetings, and there's 13 of them after today up until the election. And then after the election, we do have the GPC scheduled, but they could be more for orientation and training of the new council. Depending on how many new councillors there are, will determine how many training and orientation sessions that will be needed. So in these next 13 meetings, I was hoping we could discuss at the next GPC what you would like to see at GPCs, keeping in mind that Reimagine is going strong and is going to take up quite a bit of time of these meetings as you are the steering committee. So I'm sorry I rambled on a lot. If anybody has any questions or discussion or thoughts on that process.
Do we have anybody? I'm not seeing any.
So for the next meeting, if you could bring forward your topics that you'd like to delve into, considering the other matters that we have to discuss, that would be excellent. And we could talk about it on the 24th, as well as have that governance review and whatever else is on that up for that agenda. There's probably a little bit more reimagined to come as well that day. And I see Mr. Rudolph is here. Maybe he has more to add, or you're here for the next item.
I think there's a segue, Ms. Gurian, through the chair on agenda planning, and that's there were a couple of topics that I just want to touch base with council, and Happy New Year to council. We haven't had an opportunity to have a conversation. One is the whole COVID situation and how it's impacting on council meetings and so forth. So as you can tell, and as the public now is aware, we made the recommendation to go forward with the virtual meeting today. Last week was pretty hot and heavy in terms of the news and all the waves of information coming forward on COVID. We also made the decision to postpone the public hearings on 2 substantial public hearings coming forward this month. That's just a judgment call based on should there be a continued ramping up, an escalation of concerns around the COVID, that in an abundance of caution, we push those out a little bit. Knowing that hybrid public hearings are not necessarily working that easy to work with our phone system and the delays, that type of thing. So that was the reason for that. One of the questions that I had for Ms. Gurry, and we might need to do a poll going back to agenda planning, is council's comfort for next week in terms of having a meeting in person or going virtual. And then, so we're asking for your input. I don't have anything else in terms of the administration to offer in terms of updates, other than we continue to implement our protocol plans. We augment them as necessary. There is one part of this, and if we have any time, I'd like the Recreation Department to speak briefly today to the situation with the rec centers and our programming. And Mr. Harding is available to speak briefly to that. So it's just back to the circumstance around the virtual meetings, and I'll turn it back to Ms. Gurry if there's any guidance that she or you as council have on your pleasure respecting next week. And it's right now it's week to week.
Thank you, Mr. Rudolph. I'll just say further to that the type of meeting that was held today with the workshop, rather than being all together in a room with boards, etc., during this COVID, the recent uncertainty around COVID and the Omicron variant, that I think Zoom worked best for this meeting today for certain. Next week is your regular council meeting. We do have the Shaw Auditorium booked. We do have safety measures in place, such as your plexiglass, masks, all of those safety protocols and COVID work site plans that we are required to have. Audience is limited now. It's back to being limited so it's back to having a limited audience where it's half capacity. So basically, like Mr. Rudolph was saying, it is kind of it's up to you as a council. We can do a hybrid option and have some attend in person, some attend in Zoom. But again, depending on the agenda items, like today's committee meeting, I think was best to be done on Zoom, but it's basically up to council and what they would like to do. Hybrid has been working well for one or two of you being not in person and being over Zoom, but we would have to just nail down those electronic meeting management protocols and make sure that we're working within those so that our minutes and the public can have a good meeting to view and for you to attend. So really it's up to council how they wish to do it and their comfort level.
I have Councillor Turley would like to speak.
Thank you, Chair. Given the infectious rate of the new variant, yes, I've had my booster shot about a month ago, but I'm still far more comfortable doing Zoom than I am. Not that I don't like to be in the same room with you guys, but it's a safety precaution. So I vote for Zoom.
Okay, looks like I have 2 Zoom votes there. In terms of the public hearings, is Bevan Park an option?
So Bevan Park, it would be half capacity as well, but no, actually, it wouldn't be an option because we would have to be able to have the live stream option as well, or people to attend electronically as well. We do, when we have a public hearing that we think is going to be large, we do book the other rooms within the Vancouver Island Conference Center so that there is that overflow capacity. However, for somebody that wants to come and speak, we don't want the weather, the roads, or COVID and Omicron and the concerns around getting COVID to be like a prohibitive for coming to the meeting and having their say. So for transparency and openness and the ability to have the public participate, we made the decision to postpone those until February. We do have room at the conference center for when that happens, but within the auditorium itself, it is limited capacity, and it would be the same at Bevan as well. It would be 50% capacity levels at there as well. And then the electronic version wouldn't be available at Bevan. So not really, no.
Okay, that's a no.
Yeah. So what we could do is for the month of January. So we have a council meeting on Monday. We have another GPC on the 24th, and possibly a reimagined special GPC on the 28th. I think that's when they have it scheduled. We could do Zoom for this month and then reevaluate after the 18th, and after we see how Omicron and the COVID variant is doing. That would be an option if everybody's comfortable with that.
Okay. I think we have head shakes, thumbs, and all kinds of things happening here, so I think we're all good to go. And the mayor is changing on us.
What the heck?
I think we're going to move up to item 7 on our agenda, which is the CIO updates.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. I think that was part of it. The second piece, and I've asked Mr. Harding to speak briefly if there's any update on the recreation programming. Part of this was predicated on COVID. Some of it was around the status of the Bevan pool. And I think this was timely, at least give some public notification about the intent of rolling out the programming for this winter. So Mr. Harding is tanned and at the podium. So I was asked, turn it over to him for comment on any updates on the recreation programming.
Thank you, Mr. Rudolph, and thank you, Chair. I always notice that Mr. Rudolph always introduces it that I will briefly do it. He never does that for Mr. Lindsay. It's always me who has to do briefly.
Mr. Chair, if I've raised my hand, if I may interrupt briefly, I have to leave for my booster shot, but I just want to welcome Mr. Harding back and hope he's had a wonderful time.
Thank you, Your Worship. As well, thank you. Great to be back and Happy New Year to everybody. I'll just do quickly with what we know. Staff are actually, recreation staff are meeting managers now, again, to modify with the health order. I think council knows a bit of what's happening with some of it, but briefly, we seem to be going backwards again. So with activities, for example, weight rooms are closed until January 18th at least. All adult exercise, fitness, and dance classes are prohibited until January 18th at least. Sports tournaments are prohibited indoors and outdoors. Recreation activities are restricted to 50% capacity. Attendance at all recreation facilities, including rinks and pools, is restricted to 50% capacity, including spectators. In addition, we'll be still now doing the proof of vaccination checks for a variety of participants and volunteers and parents and such. We will be sending out a more detailed list of how those activities will be curtailed, as we've been doing throughout the whole pandemic. Will allow council then also getting out information to the public. On a positive, and again, appreciate the community's patience and council's patience with us on Bevan Pool. The staff have continued, as you know, the last few months working on rectifying different leaks. They would fix one leak and then find something else. And so they continue to work through it. But I'm pleased to say that the pool is now full of water, and we are opening January 17th. Of course, within the pandemic rules, but still it's going to be open. And then implementing as we're permitted under the orders the scheduling that we were hoping to have done back in September. So some of those user groups that have been moved to NAC will slowly move back into Bevan, and we'll continue with the implementation of opening Bevan as permitted. So again, staff have worked hard on that with a number of different constraints to get it up and running, but it is up and running, and we'll be open on the 17th, and we'll again do a broader public announcement tomorrow with details of what all that means. And please answer any questions.
Do we have any questions for Mr. Harding? I think you're off the hook for your first kick of the can here, sir.
Thank you very much.
Okay. Mr. Rudolph, if you'd unmute yourself, would carry on.
Thank you. I don't want to open a can of worms here, but I did want to speak briefly about the snow situation in the city. Mr. Sims is going to give a situation report on that. We're all well aware that this was an excessive and prolonged snow event that we've experienced here in the Lower Mainland and on the island. All the municipalities that are in this climatic zone probably far exceeded their regular ability to address what occurred. And Mr. Sims can comment on that. We have followed our policy. We've done our best, and there's been a lot of people working long hours to address this, and we certainly appreciate the efforts that they've done. I believe that council may want to see options for enhancements for future years. I've actually asked our staff to look at options for what we could bring forward to council for consideration in terms of within fiscal reasonability of moving additional resources into place should they be needed for future years. But there's a policy conversation around that for council. But I've also asked if they are available, both the police and fire chiefs, to speak here today, as well as Ms. Gurry on the communication side of this. So just to give you, I think I need to turn it over, if I may, to Mr. Sims to just give the broad update, then turn it over to the superintendent of police and the fire chief just to comment from an emergency perspective, and Ms. Gurry to speak about the comms, and then back. So if we could just go through that, and then if there's any conversation, we'd be certainly pleased to entertain your questions and comments. So if I might ask Mr. Sims, please.
Thanks, Mr. Rudolph, and thanks, Chair. Happy New Year, Council. It's good to see everyone here again. I did throw together a very quick sort of series of bullets, and have asked Mr. Thompson, who's our roads and traffic manager, as you know, to speak to some of the issues. So we've got just a really brief sort of update of what happened and the city's response, and then some of the challenges that we saw, some of the wins, and maybe after Mr. Thompson speaks on the response, I'd ask Inspector Fletcher, Chief Doyle, and Ms. Gurry to chime in just with their observations. So I'll share the screen really quickly. Hopefully that works. Everyone can see it. Yes, no?
Yes, Bill,
Okay.
you just need to change your view if you can. Like you have it on, not on PowerPoint view, or
Right.
not a huge deal, but.
It may be simpler just to not trip up.
Okay.
So Mr. Thompson, and I think Council's well aware and has received a number of challenging feedback, and certainly appreciate your patience, and of course we appreciate the public's patience. This, as Mr. Rudolph has indicated, is an extraordinary event, and so we'll just kind of touch a little bit on that. Mr. Thompson.
Thank you, Mr. Sims. Thank you, Chair, for allowing us the opportunity to come and speak to you today. So, as we know, we got a lot of snow, 130 centimeters of nearly continual snowfall since December 24th. And just to put that into context, that's more than twice the entire 2020-21 snow season, and more than 160% of what Victoria experienced over the same time frame. So operationally, we knew the event was coming. steady rainfall, freeze-thaw cycles going into the event limited the amount of preparation we could do, however. So our focus at that point, our preparation was on making sure we had all of our equipment available and making sure we understood the staff availability. As we all know, the event occurred over the Christmas and New Year's holiday period, and we anticipated that we might have potential challenges with staffing. We had a number of staff with scheduled vacations already, so understanding what our exposure there and what resources we would have available was our primary focus. So overall, I was concerned, but I was very pleased with the response and dedication of our staff who showed up to keep the city moving during this exceptional event. And during that event, it snowed 12 out of 15 days. And that continual snowfall meant that our effort was on the priority 1 routes, according to our snow and ice control policy and plan. So that's emergency response, transit routes, and major transportation corridors. Now, once we did get into the priority 3 routes, and Mr. Sims, if we go to the next slide. Once we did get into the priority 3 routes, it became apparent that our normal operation was not going to suffice. So at that point, we made the decision to bring in additional resources, and we adjusted our tactical approach. The snow plows that we have in our fleet were not capable of removing the snow and ice bonded to the road surface. The road surface throughout this entire event was below 0, and which is unusual. So material wasn't releasing from the pavement. So we needed to get a little more aggressive. So we brought in our contractor, our regular snow and ice contractor. They have a fleet of heavy equipment. So we brought in that to supplement our own fleet of backhoes to attack the 800 cul-de-sacs, 775 to 800 cul-de-sacs that we've got throughout the city. Throughout the course of the event, there were a number of emergency service diversions. So we worked regularly to support emergency response partners. Go to the next slide, please. So just to give you another piece of context, this is one of our trucks, one of our larger trucks, front plow, belly plow, sander and salter. Just give you an idea of how much work these operators and this equipment does in the course of a day. So covering everywhere from Cinnabar Valley out to Jingle Pot, downtown hospital area. So over the course of 25 hours, this vehicle would have covered many hundreds of kilometers to keep the city moving. And this is just one of 20 pieces of equipment that we have deployed for our snow fighting operations. So that was the operations and the tactics that we deployed during this event, and we're deep into our cleanup at this point. The weather warming and the rain, there is light at the end of the tunnel, so to speak. And with that, I'll turn it over to Mr. Sims.
Perhaps Inspector Fletcher could chime in if she's available, and then Chief Doyle.
Hello, good morning, or good evening, I guess it is. Can you hear me? Okay. So I did reach out to the detachment to determine the input from the staff that were working days and evenings through this snowfall. Overall, we saw an increase in some of the calls for service due to collisions and vehicles leaving the lanes. What was interesting, though, was we did not have any members really come back with fulsome examples, comments, complaints, and that's generally an indicator that it was a non-event. And this was put out to the entire detachment, and I received 2 email calls back on it. The overall communication that the members gave is residents need to be prepared for the winter, and they need to make sure that their vehicles have snow tires, that they have all all the appropriate driving skills and are prepared for the winter weather, and that in and of itself mitigated most of the issues. And there was very little input beyond that, other than one individual provided the communication strategy from another municipality, which I've shared with the City of Nanaimo. Thank you.
Thanks, Inspector Fletcher. Chief Doyle, if you're available, that would be great if you could chime in as well on your experience.
Yes. Firstly, I'd just like to thank Public Works for all their hard work and keeping the priority 1 routes and P2 and working on getting the P3 routes done. That was very helpful for the fire department. So just good work. In terms of incidents, we didn't see an appreciable increase in incidents. So that was nice, which aligns with the RCMP's experience through the snow event. In terms of the fire department's ability to respond, obviously with that amount of snowfall, it slows down all road traffic. That being said, we were able to get to our incidents. We chain up, we have heavy vehicles, and when we're not able to get right to the front door of the address, we get as close as we can and operate from that, from there, walk in or stretch hose lines, or Public Works has also given us a priority phone number where we can call to assist urgently. So they could bring out a small 4x4 pickup truck or larger piece of equipment as needed. But no, I think all in all, the fire department fared pretty well through this experience.
Thanks, Chief. And I'd like to ask Ms. Gurry to chime in on some of the communications that we've done over the last couple of weeks. It's been very extensive, I will say.
Oh, thank you, Mr. Sims. And I echo what everybody's been saying. Thank you to Public Works and Parks and all of the operations crews that have been out there working their wets off. It's been a huge effort, and it's looking really good out there. So obviously, thank you guys very much for all you did, and thank staff for all they did, and thank the public for their patience and stuff, which is what communications has been focusing on, is getting the message out to the residents of Nanaimo and citizens of Nanaimo, thanking them for their patience and understanding through this event. It has been an extraordinary event. And for the last 2 weeks, communications has been working really, really hard to support operations to get that communication out. So as it was mentioned, we did open up the Emergency Coordination Center for a couple of days. And through those 2 days, all communications for Thursday and Friday of last week were either approved by the ECC or directed by the ECC, which was through communications. We did issue Voyant Alert messaging on January 6th in the morning and in that afternoon, which I think was really helpful to residents. For this was the second major event, or third or fourth or dozen, I'm not sure. Social media, we were constantly creating responsive winter related posts on the city social media platforms, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram, regarding winter driving and road conditions, sidewalk clearing, catch basin clearing, curbside collection updates. We assisted the Parks Recreation and Culture Facility with program updating, and we monitored social media throughout the event as well, and kept in contact and retweeted our partners' messaging, such as RDN Transit, United Way, etc. Throughout the last 2 weeks, we did 6 news releases on snow and weather-related matters. We mentioned, we featured in our Nanaimo This Week on Tuesday, January 4th, and again, it will be today, snow-related content, be snow-prepared messaging, like Inspector Fletcher was saying, curbside collection updates, media requests. There was many media requests, so we coordinated those and prepared some messaging and helped get the facts to mayor and council so they were able to respond to the many messages that they were receiving regarding the snow. And we kept our website up to date with all of these snow and ice updates in addition to those news releases. We responded to webmaster emails, which come through our local channels, and assisted regularly updating other web pages. So it's been a tremendous effort. I'd really like to thank communications team for all of their hard work. Thanks, Bill.
Thanks, Ms. Gurry. I think having the support of communications pushing this messaging out it's overwhelming to deal with the event for public works and operations and park staff. So having somebody take that burden is really helpful. So certainly a number of wins in the a number of things that we did that went well, and I think you've heard some of them already. Some of the issues were that with new equipment, Parks, Rec and Culture acquired some new equipment this year, and they've were able to respond quickly and often within the day on some of the primary active transportation corridors, so the E&N Trail, the Georgia Greenway, and Front Street, and of course the Waterfront Walkway. That was a big win, and that helped people like Mr. Lindsay walk to work. And for the most part, I believe RDN Transit was on their normal sort of cycle. They did shift to the severe weather routing every once in a while, but acknowledging that walkability and sidewalks are a challenge. That most transit routes are covering getting close to residents. So I think that's the big one. I think it was a 24/7 operation, and I think one of the other wins that we saw here was sort of modifications to the plan on the fly. As Mr. Thompson mentioned, we sort of brought in additional resources to attack some of the cul-de-sacs, and we adjusted some of the times, the start times of the crews to so that they were there in advance of rush hour or visible at rush hour as well. So to sort of blunt that noise about the crews aren't even out yet. So, Councillor Turley, I see you've got a question there, or your hand up.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Sims. I can wait till after you finish your report. If you
Okay,
like,
super, thanks.
because it's a compliment.
Oh, I'm happy to take those compliments anytime. Sort of briefly, so as Mr. Thompson hinted, this is about 3.5 or 4 feet of snow over a 2-week period, which was a fairly unusual event. And the nature of the event was the struggle. It was kind of an Ontario sort of event where you had a dump of snow and quite a bit of freezing. And he talked about how the snow bonded to the road really well. And so that was certainly a challenge. And unlike a lot of municipalities across the country on the other side of the Rockies, there's a snow removal component, and we do not remove snow. We need to find room to place it. And of course, with our sidewalks being adjacent to our roads, there's not a lot of side road storage. So that's one of the challenges that we face, and that also creates a lot of challenge for the public as well. Certainly you're aware that sanitation vehicles were canceled 1 or 2 days. Other days they managed to get the majority of their routes, but some of the cul-de-sacs, steeper grades, narrow roads are really challenging to, we really don't want to have one of those large sanitation vehicles sliding backwards down a hill. So that was a challenge, but in recovery on those, we're informing those whose collection got missed, they can put out more next time. I think the beauty is that at this time of year, it doesn't smell so bad. Certainly, you're aware that salt supply on the entire West Coast is a challenge. We were hoping to receive another few loads today that'll, help for the next event. But just to give you an example, I think we've exceeded our normal annual salt consumption over the course of this 2-week event. So normally we're 1,000 or so metric tons of salt, and in this case we're over that. And I think that's typical of the entire West Coast. So certainly we can always do better, and I think again the public sort of feedback was strong, but there's a number of things that we're already sort of brainstorming along that theory of doing better. So shifting on the fly, we shifting equipment for cul-de-sacs and using different types is, will help speed that up. And then earlier communication and more frequent communication in advance of the winter, so people are hearing that message that Inspector Fletcher talked about, is being prepared and being ready. And even in the middle of the event, we were talking about people need to have appropriate clothing and emergency kits within their car. So to deal with the salt storage, we could, in a new operations center, the plan is for double the storage, and that's something that we could certainly look at even for next year. We can shift a temporary building onto the existing yard just to double our storage for better resilience. So as Mr. Rudolph mentioned, I think, we followed the policy that we have in place. It mirrors many other Lower Mainland municipality policies. But it's an opportunity perhaps to revisit. Maybe there's, we recognize that there's always a need to do better. There's always an increased level of public expectation. So we can bring some options forward for council's consideration. I think that's kind of a natural consequence. And bearing in mind, it's like, well, we should do should we do snow removal? Like, should we buy a bunch of, road-sized snow blowers and big long trucks? Well, we can do that, but that sits there for 50 weeks of the year. So this was an extraordinary event. The public was inconvenienced for a period of time, and still being inconvenienced. I don't want to minimize that, but it's also, how prepared was the public in this one. So that's really the extent of the update. I'd be happy to take questions or hear conversation from any one of us. Thank you.
Councillor Turley has a comment, I think.
A compliment.
Compliment.
First of all, I'd like to compliment all of the city staff involved at whatever level of dealing with these challenging 2 weeks. I will say that I spent, and I think some of you already heard me reiterate this, but I spent the 24th, the 29th, and the 31st all day, each day, delivering flowers in my Honda CRV. That's a good promotion for the CRV because I had absolutely no problems whatsoever. And I even went up Marion Way one day and down without any issues. So I reiterate what Mr. Sims says. If a person is prepared and has some knowledge about how to drive in this stuff, it wasn't an issue. Having said that, the number of people that I saw, that they try to get up a hill, and of course, what do? First of all, they step on the gas as hard as they can, which got them absolutely nowhere. And it's an education thing, and when you're going down a hill, you don't put on the brakes, you put it in low gear, and you gently tap your brakes so that you will hopefully stop at the bottom. I would also like to compliment on the use of salt. I noticed on many of the main roads that going up the hill was where the salt was used, so there was a lot of bare pavement there. Coming down, they conserved and didn't obviously use a lot of salt because there was still hard-packed snow coming down the hill, and that I'm sure was done for two reasons. Number one, to conserve the salt. Number two, where people have most problem is trying to get up a hill as opposed to coming down. The other thing I think that we need to be cognizant of is we're in a generation now where instant gratification is the norm. And the number of emails that we received that, I have to get to work. It snowed yesterday. I can't get to work. Well, maybe you should consider looking at the weather forecast to find out what the forecast is, and then don't park at the bottom of the hill where you've only got one way and that's up. To get out, park up at the top and walk up. I mean, there are simple solutions to some of these issues that people have. Anyway, I could go on and on and on, but I would just like to say that city staff, I, as a longtime resident in IMO, and I will say that my first challenge of driving in snow was in 1964 when I was 16 and the first year I was doing deliveries for the flower shop. I got stuck once every hour on the hour. And I learned from that. And I think don't take the criticism too hard. I mean, learn from it, but you're never going to be satisfying everybody. So well done. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Turley. Does anybody else wish to make a comment? If not, I will. I want to also thank staff and the contractors we hired for the work they did. I know they worked as hard as they could with the resources that this council gave them. We've had this policy in place that I know of. We reviewed it at the beginning of our tenure, and it's kept well over the years. This year, the public, it didn't meet the expectations of our public. And it's not because of the work that staff was doing. They were doing the work they needed to do, and they were doing it well with the resources that we gave them. So I look forward to the conversation coming up where we will possibly relook at this policy, possibly look at adding more resources to it. I would certainly like to look at the question of sidewalks and how do we deal with them going forward. And I just want to thank once again staff for the work that they did during a rather difficult time. And I can quite honestly say that we've been getting these long rainstorms coming through, one right after another, all this year. We just happened to get one that came out when it was really cold. And there's no guarantee that this isn't going to happen 3 weeks from now. So I think we need to relook at this policy, and I think we need to work with staff to see what sort of other resources are necessary to go forward. So thanks very much for your report. Is there any other information? Mr. Turley, Councillor Turley is waving again.
Sorry, I forgot one thing. And that is, I plan on buying a snow blower because I've got 2 driveways that I have to clear. And that'll almost guarantee that we probably won't get any snow for the next 5 years. So,
excellent. Appreciate you reaching out for that. Mr. Sims, do you have anything else you'd like to do? I notice you have one more slide, I hope.
Thanks, Chair. No, I haven't. We've got a number of slides that it's just detail that show some of the conditions that occurred in different places. I think you got an email on Sunview Road, and you see how narrow it is, but it's also a 17% grade downwards off the main road. So that these are the sorts of things that create challenges for the plow operators. So no reason to, other than if you were interested in that level of detail. I can stop sharing.
Thank you. I would also remind you that your quotes of Game of Thrones, they did win that war, so the winter didn't show up when it was supposed to. So I look forward to your working on that. Mr. Rudolph, do you have anything else you'd like to add?
Oh, Mr. Chair, that was it. And thank you again for, I thought it was a productive afternoon with the Reimagine. If anything is a priority in moving forward in the amount of public engagement and the expectations is that there will be some positive conclusion to a yeoman's amount of work that's taken place over the last year or so. And so these GPC planning conversation in the next 6 months is really, we understand that it's a priority to have the time that you need to work your way through those issues and for the public to have enough time to respond. So I look forward to the next several months on that and the other files that we have. So thank you very much.
Thank you. I don't have anything else. Is there anybody sitting in the auditorium with a question, Ms. Gurry? Okay, so we don't have any questions. I'd be looking forward to Councillor Martman giving us a notice of motion for adjournment. And there it is. So thank you. Seconded by Councillor Gesselbrack. All those in favor, raise your hands. I see none opposed. That's carried. I think we're good to go. I'll see you everybody at our next meeting. Peace out.
Sure.